of our heart.
The hellfires of Bethlehem warming the cockles of our heart. Unbeatable. No, the goblin goes.
Yes.
The goblin goes. We always have the goblin going.
Yes.
The goblin is important.
Well, she is in keeping with the mood of Madame Pele, who has just started a magnificent eruption, holy ma'u, and has covered the lava floor and fountains and all kinds of good stuff. So
Yes.
Yay, goblins and fire and Pele and all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. That's what truly matters. Oh man,
Definitely.
okay, you guys got your drinks. I got some
I have-
tea just for
I got a drink.
I have a beer and some extra beer, and
There's a standby beer waiting for me.
I've got a standby beer in the fridge and I've got one ready to go.
yeah.
Oh boy.
So it's the it's Madame Pele is thinking that the hellfires of Kinham's deity need competition, and so she's decided, I'll show you hellfire.
Ah.
It has it's definitely it quickly covered the floor. I was surprising how fast it took to cover the floor. It's now running over 370 acres or 150 hectares of lava surface.
Alright, 3, 2, 1. Hello everybody, and welcome back to
Hey.
the Big Hub. And
Hi.
we are now
Hi.
on part 3. Please excuse the blank screen. That's just for nothing for now. Don't worry about it. It's fine. There's nothing happening here. There is definitely no void staring back at you. That is 100% not a thing that is happening. Alright? Alright?
Don't look down there or over. What's it over there? Or over there?
The bottom.
It's somewhere. The void is somewhere down there.
There's some void somewhere. It seems to be infecting me from over on Dapper's channel. So special congratulations to Dapper as he did just hit his 10K.
Thank you.
And his birthday's coming up.
Yay!
Yes, a week from today. Actually, a week from now, I'm intending to be live on my channel.
I see that you have discarded your deep fake humanoid fake persona.
Yeah, my human suit. Yeah, I took the human suit off so I could be back here as a dinosaur.
So, I mean, that's only appropriate.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really quiet. Okay, hold on. I'll fix my audio a little bit. Wop. Wop, wop, wop. Is that better? Hopefully that's better. Hopefully it's not too loud now. Okay, so last time we left our intrepid heroes, we were dealing with Kenham versus Bill Nye, and we got through. It took us an entire, first episode that was, 4 hours long to get through, the first 5 minutes of Kenham talking. And then this time we got through the rest of Kenham, and we got through a portion of what Bill Nye was getting up to. And I knew we were criticizing Bill Nye, a considerable, I think a fair amount. I don't think we were unfair.
Certainly less than we criticized Ken Ham.
Yeah, certainly less than that. But I mean, that seems fair. That.
So,
Ken Ham
is a drink? Yeah, I mean both are drinkable. But is there a drinking game or guidance that we should consider this time?
Yes, so our standard drinking rule is drink whenever Kenham gets something right, drink whenever Bill Nye gets something wrong, drink when, whatever it was is just too stupid and we need to take a drink, and you can send AIG is a bag of dicks, which we borrow from Dapper if you super chat for a drink.
Because they are.
But you have to do it in a way that is more, is YouTube friendly. And
yes.
And
yeah, if you just type out AIG is a bag of dicks. Yeah, YouTube will censor that.
Yep. So you gotta trick the censor. You gotta go past the censor. So shall we get looking?
Yes.
I guess so. It's been a while. I apologize. I was in the land slightly down under, looking at a
Slightly.
1 minute 11.2 seconds of total solar eclipse. Got to go see a total eclipse. Got to do it. Not this partial stuff. Got to be the total thing. So that's that. And also wonderful stuff like Komodo dragons are big. I mean, they you see pictures of them, but when you're like 2-3 meters away from them, they're going like, oh my goodness, that be a big thing.
Landon, that's the biggest lizard in the world, but what's the biggest lizard in North America?
For lizard, I don't know what classifies as a lizard.
Well, if it's a reptile,
classify as lizard.
No, alligators do not count as lizards.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Nor do crocodiles.
Well, we do
It
have a
is the
super
Gila
chat from.
monster.
Oh, that makes sense.
The Gila monster.
Huh.
Yeah.
It does have monster in the name, and Komodo dragons have dragon in the name, so that follows.
Yeah.
Is it as drooly as the Komodo? Because that dragons were they were like very, very slobbery.
It is less slobbery and more venomous.
That makes sense. So we did get a super chat from Vandalia saying, has it been 10 years since this debate? If I remember correctly, the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate took place 7 years ago.
Yeah, I was just thought that was 7 or 8.
I will double check. Before we get started. 2014. So 9 years ago. So almost a decade.
Wow. That's older than I thought.
Oh, yeah, it is a little bit older than I thought. So, let us switch on over. And let me pull this up here. So, we are specifically about 53 minutes into this, and Bill Nye is currently going through his slides about how what Cam is saying doesn't make any sense. And we do have our drink counter, so if there are drinks and I miss them, please make sure to help me keep track, because you know how unreliable I am. Alright, you ready?
I'm not going to get any more ready anytime soon.
Alright, hit play.
Let's go for it.
Today, the very, very lowest estimate is that there are about 8.7 million species. But a much more reasonable estimate is it's 50 million or even 100 million when you start counting the viruses and the bacteria and all the beetles that must be extant in the tropical.
By the way,
so it's it's about the right order of magnitude as the likely number of like extant species on Earth, probably. But it's one of those things where it's like, how do you guess how many things you don't know about? I don't know. Good luck.
Well, I mean, in asteroid searches, we talk about the rate of finding them, new ones, and we're seeing a decline in that as we get better. But that's a very different thing than finding biological critters.
So the trouble with that is that the rate of finding new species varies significantly across different taxonomic groups. So, like the rate of finding new mammals is pretty low. The rate of finding new insects is very high. And for like throughout the 90s, if you look at like say paleontology, we were describing like a new dinosaur every few months. Now it's closer to once a week. So does that mean that there's now more dinosaurs than there were back in the 90s? Well,
yeah.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's what that means. So yeah, it's with asteroids. It's nice because it's like, okay, there's a place you're looking for them. It's called the sky, and most people who have reasonable darkness have access to look at it. But when it comes to like biology, and you're like, let's look for new species. It's like, well, where are you going to look? And it's like inside some geothermal spring. It's like, well, that's not easy to get to.
Under a rock.
Right. Or like, we're gonna go into like the depths of the Atacama Desert, like 4 weeks from civilization. Like that's not an easy place to be in to look. So with biology, you can kind of use the rate of finding new species as a bit of a proxy, but it has a lot more assumptions that have to go in there that don't necessarily for say asteroids.
There's also a question.
By the way, in astronomy, go ahead.
There's a question in the chat that says, "Can we count viruses as species?"
Ness.
It kind of depends.
Yeah. It's like
say for astronomy, if you want to look for asteroids, you go to that Atacama Desert because it's really great skies for searching for stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So
the thing with viruses are, so they are evolving biological systems. Whether or not they're alive doesn't really matter, but also species are a little fake in the first place, and they're a little extra fake when it comes to asexual, very rapidly reproducing organisms, which would include viruses. So, like, the answer is, like, there's no objective right or wrong answer to the question, should we count viruses as separate species? Go for it if you want to, don't if you don't want to. Just don't pretend that you're doing something you're not with them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that Bill Nye is probably in the clear to say this because he is, like, saying this many species, and then you start counting bacteria and viruses and things that are developing.
It is important that any long-standing parasites would have to be on the Ark to get through, because at least if they are things that parasitize things that would have to be on the Ark to survive. So, for instance, someone in Noah's family had to have tapeworms, someone had to have roundworms, someone had to have chlamydia. You know, Noah's family was in pretty rough shape, apparently. Someone there had to have malaria.
Oh, no.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, dear. Well, maybe the insects that were biting the various kinds of critters on there were keeping the malaria thing going.
You can't do that for a year, though. Some vertebrate has to be infected with the malarial paramecium over the course of a year, or it's just not going to last that long, because mosquitoes don't last that long. So if it's just contained in the mosquito gut, it's going to die out. And yet, malaria is still here.
It bit something. What if it bit something else on the Ark? Maybe that was...
Oh, and that thing went, like, yeah, maybe. Okay, how about this? Some animals most likely had to have malaria on the Ark. It didn't have to be any of Noah's families necessarily. But there were animals with malaria on that Ark. Otherwise, malaria would have gone extinct.
This is one of those things, like, trying to make the lore consistent is very, very difficult when you're dealing with specifically young Earth creationism. And then Vandalia for 2 said, but how many kinds of viruses were on the Ark? All of them, apparently.
Yeah, but only virus families need to be on there, because that's what the kind is, apparently. The viruses within the family, those can evolve later.
All the cousins can wait.
But isn't there a scripture verse that says crawling on the land thing, and the viruses don't crawl, so therefore it wasn't on the Ark?
Well, so here's the thing. The writers of the Bible had no knowledge of microscopic pathogens. They had no germ theory of disease. So sure, they don't account for any of this. But modern young Earth creationists who think that this story is literally something that happened have to account for it somehow, because they know that there are such things as viruses and bacteria and, you know, parasitic fungi and paramecia and whatnot.
We got Alicia gifted 1 membership, and it went to Smitty, so congratulations, Smitty, and thank you so much to Alicia.
Hey,
also,
thank you, Smitty.
Brian Stevens said, what about Ebola? Who was carrying that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Ugandan Knuckles.
Basically. Something has to be carrying basically any disease you can think of that's been around since essentially the beginning of, like, human history. So you don't need anyone with HIV, but at least one of the monkeys on board has to have SIV, simian immunovirus. At least one of the felines on board, of which there's apparently only 2, has to have FIV, because feline AIDS is a thing.
Right.
Yeah. So, like,
There's, like, a lot of things to consider. Again, it's specifically because this is coming from AIG, which likes to claim that they're a group that studies these things.
Yeah, they should have answers to this. As far as I know,
God
they have
made
never
the disease
actually
after the
bothered
fact.
to publish. Oh, okay.
You just say it's a miracle and be done with it, right?
I think that's the best argument, personally.
Now, there is that. However, there's a long-standing tradition within a lot of theological schools, including the schools to which AIG, belongs or draws from, that the creative acts of God were confined to the creation week, and that after that, he was no longer engaged in creative activities in that same way.
Sure.
So most of them would probably actually reject that option on the basis of that wider theological tradition that the creative actions of God were finished after the first 6 days of creation, which means they would probably look for a different solution. I don't know what it would be, but that's probably why I would expect them to reject that option of God just miraculously creating all the disease-causing pathogens after the flood, even though it would make more sense from their narrative.
Oh, fair enough. All right, let's see what Bill Nye has to say about this.
That we haven't found. So we'll take a number which I think is pretty reasonable, 16 million species today, okay? If these came from 7,000 kinds, let's say we have 7,000 subtracted from 15 million, that's 15,993. We have 4,000 years, we have 365 and a quarter days a year. We would expect to find 11 new species every day. So you'd go out into your yard, you wouldn't just find...
Real quick. So that is a bit of an exaggeration. If you would need to use the, what's essentially the compound interest rate formula to figure out how many, like the rate of new species, because it would accelerate as you went on in time. But there's a problem with that too, right? Because it would mean at first you don't actually see that many species, but what it should mean is that speciation is accelerating through time. But through recorded history, speciation rates have not been that high. They should be exceedingly high right now and relatively low at the time of Noah. But what they actually need is the reverse. So Bill Nye is understating the problem here.
He's doing a linear approximation, but in fact it won't be linear. Now, now it is true, to be fair, if you use the linear approximation of 11 species per day, you're not going to find them in your backyard. But you will, you would be encountering new stuff. Quite commonly, and some of that stuff presumably would be pretty well adapted and might be chompy stompy more than you like. You think your neighborhood's nice and quiet, all of a sudden there's a chomper stomper thing showing up.
And we also have another bit of a problem, which is that AIG, which is the organization Ken Ham runs, is where this is being done.
Are they a bag of?
They are in fact a bag of dicks.
Okay.
Yes. So they actually say that Abraham went to Egypt in the 1800s BC, and the problem is that they also tie in Abraham's visit to a particular dynasty. It's the 4th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. The thing is, we have extensive records of the Middle Kingdom, including what animals were around, and they actually had slightly more diversity in wildlife than current Egypt has, which means that following the flood, which is only happening like less than a millennium before before Abraham, you have to get all of the speciation to get to the levels of diversity that we see in Egypt, which are basically just modern plus a few things that have since gone extinct. And then from then on, essentially no further significant amounts of speciation like that. So basically they have to cram all of the speciation into the first few hundred years until we get to Egypt, because at that point we know that modern diversity has been reached, at least in the region of Africa. And also if you look at, say, Roman records, we know that like modern cetacean varieties had been achieved. They were hunting the same kinds of animals that are in Europe now, plus a few, because aurochs were still alive and whatnot. So they have a really big problem, because Bill Nye here is saying, well, to get to now, which for him was, 2014?
Yeah.
Yeah, so to get to 2014, we would need 11 species a day. Well, first, it would be a lot more than that recently because of the exponential problem. But even then, he actually is giving them way more time than they actually have. They need to get to that many species in a few thousand years. There should have been several hundred new species per day for a few centuries. And then that just kind of stopped for some reason. Why? Hard to say.
I mean, the amount of genetic mutations you have to have for something would be phenomenal if you had that kind of rate of stuff showing up.
Oh yeah, it would require a phylogenetic replacement rate that's orders of magnitude higher than measured phylogenetic replacement rates from actual real world studies. But that's the problem with creationism generally. They have a problem where almost everything that they need to happen needs to happen at least a few orders of magnitude faster than it's known to be possible to have happen. And that's because they are thinking that the world is about 750,000 times younger than it is. So, some stuff has to happen fast.
This seems to me like it's a definitely drink for Bill Nye being wrong, or if you want to be nice to Bill Nye, say that he's being far too generous.
I think it's just being generous. I think
too generous.
Yeah. He's he could have said, I'm doing a linear approximation to be generous to him, and even then it's a problem.
Right.
But
yeah, he's being way too generous is what I would say.
I would then
I'm
add
still
on
on the
to
problem.
Say, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I would say that would still be wrong because it's not necessarily a good idea in this kind of a setting. So, like, I'm not saying he's factually wrong. What I'm saying is from a debate standpoint and, like, the impact that this debate was going to have, I don't think being generous in this scenario is a very good idea, especially at the time period.
But the other problem with this sort of biodiversity explosion you have to have somehow is consider the problem of Mauna Loa, right? If the flood covered the Earth and then Mauna Loa pops up, the amount of magmatic material that had to go into the atmosphere would be very uncomfortable for critters, right? If Mauna Loa were created above the floodwaters that fast, not only would that'd be a really cool eruption, but it would also do really nasty things to the Earth's atmosphere, making it more hard for the 11 species a day linear things to show up.
All right, but Landon, we're already in a situation where enough heat is being released according to the processes proposed by creationists themselves, that the Earth has overcome its gravitational binding energy. So I don't think you have to worry about that too much.
Okay, that's true. Then Mauna Loa would be just a convenient plasma lump that just happened to form there.
Exactly. Yeah, because actually, recently AIG actually published in their own journal a paper that was like, oh hey, the heat problem is still a big problem. In fact, it's bigger than we thought. And one of the things that they published in there was like the actual estimated gravitational binding energy of the Earth, which turns out to have been a bit lower than the amount of heat that they were producing, which means that Earth would have kind of done like an Alderaan from Star Wars kind of a thing.
I think there's something to be said too that we were giving Bill Nye a little bit of leeway due to the amount of time that he had to explain some of these concepts.
True.
And just because like we know that he's going up against like a lot of nonsense, but I also think we were critical on that specifically because it means that the amount of prep work that he would have had to do would have needed to be done, right? So we were more critical of his prep work necessarily, not, but still like a little bit lenient towards understanding that he's got to kind of pick his battles.
Yeah.
So Vandalia for 199 said, so then viruses are friendly before Eve ate fruit.
Yeah, I've heard creationists unironically make that argument, that viruses were nice symbiotic organisms before the fall, and that they only were disease-causing afterwards. I don't know what...
So what, they got mad?
Yeah, I guess.
Satan caused them to be like mess up.
No, God caused them. Because remember, the fall, all the results of the fall are something that God imposed. Yeah. So that would be God telling the viruses to go be dicks.
Okay, well that definitely increases God's kill count by an
God said,
exponential
"Go be
number.
a dick."
Go be a dick. Listen, Ken Ham is just and AIG are just following the words of God to go be a dick. Savage Cobra official per se for 2 said the plasma cloud formerly known as Earth.
Yeah, basically.
There you go.
If the model of how the Earth moon system formed reasonably correct, we had not quite plasma cloud, but we certainly had a pretty close vapor cloud when the young proto-Earth was destroyed, colliding with an object which became much of the moon. And that model has actually been fairly successful in explaining everything from the formation of the moon, the composition of Earth's surface, and what the Apollo astronauts back from the moon, other things. So yeah, there was in science, the early Earth was not a happy place for things that wanted to be biologically happy.
Okay.
For things.
Smitty asked an interesting question about mutualistic viruses. The answer is yes, there are mutualistic viruses. There are a group of viruses that are carried by parasitoid wasps that infect caterpillars. And what happens is they carry the virus, and when they lay an egg in a caterpillar, and then the larval wasp is going to hatch out and start eating the caterpillar alive from the inside out, that also infects the caterpillar with the virus, which suppresses the caterpillar's immune system, preventing it from ejecting the wasp larva. Which means that virus is in a mutualistic relationship with that wasp species. Which is also incredibly unpleasant, but,
Yeah. Isn't this part of the so-called fall of creation stuff that the AIG...
Yeah, this is all because if Eve hadn't eaten that fruit, then there would be no parasitoid wasps.
Women!
Dang it.
Yeah.
All right, I hit play.
A different bird, a new bird, you'd find a different kind of bird. A whole new species of bird.
Drink for
every
kind.
day. A new species of
Yeah,
fish, a new species of organisms you can't see, and so on. I mean, this would be enormous news. The last 4,000 years, people would have seen these changes among us. So the Cincinnati Enquirer, I imagine, would carry a column right next to the weather report.
Look at Kansas sitting there going like,
yeah.
Did you see, Landon? Did you see some of the memes that came out of this thing?
I can imagine.
The one of Ken Ham talking and Bill Nye just staring daggers at him while he's talking from across the podium is probably one of the more popular ones. Oh, man.
11 every day. But we see no evidence of that. There's no evidence of these species. There just simply isn't enough time. Now, as you may know, I was graduated from engineering school, and I got a job at Boeing. I worked on 747s. Okay, everybody relax. I was very well supervised. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
There's a tube in the 747.
Cold
I
room.
think it was my tube, but that
Yeah,
aside,
that was a joke that didn't land. We drink for those.
The highway.
We drink
All
for
right.
jokes that don't land.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because these rules were devised for Kent Hovind, and he has a lot of really bad jokes. So he has some okay ones, too, to be fair.
And definitely there's Bill Nye is playing to a very, very difficult room.
Yeah, to be fair, he's got a hostile audience there, I believe.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
for
definitely.
sure, yeah.
By the
I'm sure he's got some supporters there.
Listen,
Yeah, I'm sure
Aaron
he has
Rod
some
didn't
supporters,
laugh
but,
loud enough. We know for a fact that Aaron is in the audience.
Yeah, we do.
So, like, Aaron's not out there just, like, just crazy loud guffaw just to, like...
He does have a good laugh. I will say give Aaron that.
He does, and it would have been really funny to just hear him be, like, the one guy in the audience laughing too loudly at the joke that didn't land. Oh my god, back when the suits at Boeing actually listened to engineers.
Zing.
But-oots.
Ways of Washington State quite a bit. I was a young guy. I had a motorcycle. I used to go mountain climbing in Washington State, Oregon. And you can drive along and find these enormous boulders on top of the ground. Enormous rocks, huge, sitting on top of the ground. Now, out there in
Right over
regular
there.
academic pursuits, regular geology, people have discovered that there used to be a lake in what is now Montana, which we charmingly refer to as Lake Missoula. It's not
Yes,
there now,
yay,
but the evidence
Lake
for it, of
Missoula.
course, is, if I may, overwhelming. And so an
I used to go
ice
swimming
dam
there.
would form at Lake Missoula, and once in a while it would break. It would build up and break, and there were multiple floods in my old state of Washington State. And but just before we go on, let me just say, go Seahawks. That was very gratifying. Very gratifying for me. Anyway,
Topical.
you drive along the road, and there are these rocks. So
Yeah.
if, as is asserted
Well, local
here
sports
at
ball
this
team.
facility, that the heavier rocks would sink to the bottom during a flood event. The big rocks, and especially their shape, instead of aerodynamic, the hydrodynamic, the water changing shape as water flows past. You'd expect them to sink to the bottom, but here are these enormous rocks right on the surface, and there's no shortage of them. If you go driving in Washington State or Oregon, they're readily available. So how could those be there if the Earth is just 4,000 years old? How could they be there if this one flood caused
Oh,
it?
it's a miracle.
Another remarkable thing.
I'm living right now on a glacial moraine just right next to Trudeau's Ditch, right? And we have giant rocks that were left behind because the glacier went receded, didn't clean up after itself, and it left all kinds of rocks behind. It was very messy in its retreat. But that being said, it'd be interesting how fast the thing melted. Of course, I guess the other creationists would, or the AIG would deny that we had a ice age, or would they?
No, they say that there was only one glacial period, and that it was a few hundred years following the flood, and that all of the ice age evidence, like frozen mammoths or frozen woolly rhinos or things like that, as well as all the glacial moraines, were all done in one ice age that happened 300 or 400 years after the flood and lasted for about a century and a half-ish.
And all that heat of that water melting that was ice went somewhere, I guess.
I mean, they are
That's
already
impressive.
very used to just hand-waving away heat flow problems. So, I mean,
Fair.
compared to the heat flow problem from the flood, the heat flow problem from the ice age is that's peanuts.
I'd like everybody to consider, inherent in this worldview is that somehow Noah and his family were able to build a wooden ship that would house 14,000 individuals. There are 7,000 kinds, and there's a boy and a girl for each one of those. So it's about 14,008 people. And these people were unskilled. As far as anybody knows, they had never built a wooden ship before. Furthermore, they had to get all these animals on there, and they had to feed them, and I understand that Mr. Ham has some explanations for that, which I frankly find extraordinary, but this is the premise of the bit. And we can then run a test, a scientific test. People in the early 1900s built an extraordinarily large wooden ship, the Wyoming. It was a 6-masted schooner, the largest one ever built. It had a motor on it for winching cables and stuff. But this boat had a great difficulty. It was not as big as the Titanic, but it was a very long ship. It would twist in the sea. Mm-hmm. It would twist this way, and this way. And in all that twisting...
Okay, all right, I'm really sorry.
All of the ways. It twisted in all of the ways, guys.
A very wiggly, twisty piece of wood.
I'm now getting flashbacks to the Hungry Caterpillar book. That's how I'm imagining the Wyoming.
This is one of those things that
is the Hungry Caterpillar.
This is one of those things that should have probably had a diagram, or like maybe if he had like something that was kind of maybe more gelatinous that he could just twist around to be like a slinky.
Are you telling me I need to make a twisty gelatinous arc 3D animation for you?
I think
I mean, not
so.
for me, but I think it should be done.
I think that's definitely a thing to do.
I mean, what would I do? I'd probably just parent the arc to a subdivided cube and then put a soft body animation on it. That would probably work. Yeah.
Does that have a window where you can have a dove come out or something? Is that?
I mean, it can.
Yes.
It's right now. It's just a hypothetical 3D model. It can have whatever you want.
And
I can put Optimus Prime on there if you want.
It's just a rectangle. Yeah. Oh
okay.
My God.
So
can we get an Optimus Prime arc?
So these
that might
people
cost you money.
in Wyoming built this ship that was not very stable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It leaked a lot, which I'm sure Bill here is going to tell us.
It leaked. It leaked like crazy.
Oh, yep.
The crew could not keep the ship dry. And indeed,
Drink
it
for
eventually foundered and
predictions?
sank, loss
Sure.
of all 14 hands. So there were 14 crewmen aboard a ship built by very, very skilled shipwrights in New England.
I'm gonna call him wrong on that, because he just said there were 14 crewmen. For Noah's family or for the
No,
boats he
for the
was talking about
Wyoming.
before? Okay, because I was gonna say
This is
there's
for the
no
Wyoming.
way they let the women do anything on these ships. All right.
I mean,
I stand corrected.
Ken Ham assumes that they were very active in animal care and keeping of the ship, primarily because, well, think about this, right? He has a zoo at the Ark encounter that has far fewer animals than the Ark would have had, and he has a zookeeping staff that's in like the low 20s or high 20s or low 30s most of the time.
Mhm.
And now he's proposing that many more animals were cared for an entire year with a maximum staff of 8. He needs all 4 of those women to be working day in, day out alongside the men. Otherwise, he has even less time for the animal care. So, he's assuming that they're all shoveling
I'm not
shit
really sure,
and feeding
like,
animals.
how far AIG goes into, like, the misogynistic land of young Earth creationism. Like, are they, like, on the lighter side? I mean, they do have, they've had Georgia as part of their staff, like, forward-facing staff for a very long time, so.
They definitely have women
Are they equal opportunist liars?
I don't know for certain. I don't know, like, where they stand on things like should women be allowed to preach or be pastors or something. I don't know where they stand on that, but I will say that they have hired at least 2 women as their PhD hires. So there was Georgia Purdom and there's also Gabriella Haynes, both of whom have actual real PhDs. They also have a number of women that they have had on as various spokespeople, not so much as a result of having some higher education, as so much as like they just seemed like they were pretty good with like PR stuff and just having a decent on-screen presence. So while I will say that their staff is more heavily male, I do think that is more of a reflection of the fact that just young Earth creationism, in terms of people who are actually interested in talking about it, also skews heavily male. So
that's fair.
Now my shipwriting friend just sent me a message saying that the Wyoming actually had a standard complement of 16 people. He said they had a captain, a first mate, a second mate, engineer, cook, cabin boy, and 7 able-bodied seamen. And the last voyage had only 13. So it's sort of the complement of the number of people that manned the ship. But he's not saying
so Bill's
that's
a
not
little bit
extraordinary.
off.
Yeah.
He's
The last
close,
thing was
but
16.
he's close, but he's wrong enough to be worth some alcohol.
Okay, fair enough.
It is certainly it is, but he does say that it is the it is certainly is the largest wooden vessel, and it didn't it's only been located recently, the shipwreck in 2003.
Oh,
wow.
That's amazing.
Interesting.
So between this debate and now, they found the ship that Bill Nye is referring to.
They would have found it before, because if it's 2003 and this was 2014, it was 11
Oh, sorry,
years before
I heard that as 2023. I don't know why. My brain is just
time. Maybe time just isn't real.
Maybe time is just as bendy as the Ark would have had to have been.
There you go.
Well, space-time is pretty bendy, especially
True.
in the faith of based on curvature.
These guys were the best in the world at wooden shipbuilding, and they couldn't build a boat as big as the Ark is claimed to have been. Is that reasonable? Is that possible? That the best shipbuilders in the world couldn't do what 8 unskilled people, men and their wives, were able to do? If you visit the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., it's 163 acres, and they have 400 species. By the way, this picture that you're seeing was taken by spacecraft in space, orbiting the Earth. If you told my grandfather, let alone my father, that we had that capability, they would have been amazed. That capability comes from our fundamental understanding of gravity, of material science, of physics, and life science, where you go looking. This place is often, as any zoo, is often deeply concerned and criticized for how it treats its animals. They have 400 species on 163 acres, 66 hectares. Is it reasonable that Noah and his colleagues, his family, were able to maintain 14,000 animals and themselves and feed them aboard a ship that was bigger than anyone's ever been able to build? Now, here's the thing. What we want in science, science as practiced out on the outside, is an ability to predict. We want to have a natural law that is so obvious and clear, so well understood, that we can make predictions about what will happen. We can predict that we can put a spacecraft in orbit and take a picture of Washington, D.C. We can predict that if we provide this much room for an elephant, it will live healthily for a certain amount of time. So I'll give you an example. In the explanation provided by traditional science of how we came to be, we find, as Mr. Ham alluded to many times in his recent remarks.
I'm just going to pause him for 1 second here. It seems like what he's kind of trying to get into now is trying to sell science as a concept and trying to, at this point, not debate, but educate about what science does and what science is and why it's valuable rather than debating the topic. Do you guys think that was a good decision, a bad decision? I mean, it makes sense for the audience he's talking to because they obviously do not understand these types of things.
I do think it's a pretty good decision, and here's why, right? Mm-hmm. The problem with young Earth creationism is not primarily the odd conclusions that they come to, right? It's more fundamental than that. It's more that they don't even have conclusions. They have preclusions that they pretend are their conclusions from science. So young Earth creationists start out saying, well, we know, despite any evidence, that the Earth must be only 6,000 whatever years old. And so all the evidence has to fit into that. And so we're just going to pretend that whatever evidence we find fits into that. And if it doesn't fit into that, well, we just don't understand it yet, so we'll just get rid of it. And so rather than actually doing science, they're doing the opposite of science. And so fundamentally, if you want to get people to stop being anti-science, you can't do it by going individually after their incorrect conclusions, right? You have to go on after, why is it that you're not able to be scientific? Why are you not following the very basics of the scientific method in terms of things like following the data, not starting with a conclusion that you have to accept? And so ultimately, I think Bill Nye's goal, because I mean, obviously his goal is not to change Ken Ham's mind. He knows that's not going to happen. I think his goal is to plant the seeds of better science literacy among primarily Christians, because I mean, ultimately that's who the Ken Ham's target audience is, and he's speaking to Ken Ham's audience. So I do think it's a pretty good idea.
And I think you make a good point, Dapper. Remember, Bill Nye is a farm engineer turned science communicator, right? And so he's kind of doing what he does. That's sort of his shtick. So I'll give him that sort of is his. This is part of his common thing, figuring for audiences and explaining about the value of science and what is achieved. Now he, probably recognize again the audience might be people who say, well, if science doesn't confirm my religious theology foundations, then we can toss out science because I presuppose that my faith is right and science must be therefore wrong. And I think Bill Nye is trying to at least appeal to that thing, saying, look what science is doing before you decide it's worthless.
We find a sequence of animals in what generally is called the fossil record. This would be to say, when we look at the layers that you would find in Kentucky, you look at them carefully, you find a sequence of animals, a succession. And as one might expect, when you're looking at old records, there's some pieces seem to be missing.
Yeah, he's focusing a lot on evolution here, which I think makes sense, but I would almost say that it might be valuable for him to have made this point about what science is and why it's valuable in his opening statement,
Well, I think
And,
he
like,
did to some extent.
He did a little
he?
bit, and then, yeah, he did. And then he, during the first half of this, when we were watching it earlier, he spent a lot of times talking about, like, the age of trees and, like, defining the age of the earth. But I almost feel like those points are going to get lost if you're talking to people who don't understand the fundamentals and you're planning on bringing the fundamentals up. So it might have been a good idea to go from opening statement with these generalized statements and then into the specifics of what science is and why it's valuable, and then into your specifics and your debunking portion. Maybe that's just me. I don't know.
Pretty good. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. I also don't remember his opening well enough to want to make a strong statement about it because, well, I don't remember it.
It has been like a month and a half.
Yeah.
Gap. So scientists got to thinking about this. There are lungfish that jump from pond to pond in Florida and end up in people's swimming pools. And they're amphibians, frogs and toads, croaking and carrying on. And so people wondered if there wasn't a fossil or an organism, an animal that had lived, that had characteristics of both. People over the years had found that in Canada, there was clearly a fossil marsh, a place that used to be a swamp, had dried out.
That's what Canada is. It's a frozen swamp.
Swamp fossils there, ferns, so on, and organisms, animals, fish that were recognized. And people realized that if this, with the age of the rocks there, as computed by traditional scientists, with the age of the rocks there, this would be a reasonable place to look for an animal, a fossil of an animal that lived there. And indeed, scientists found it. Tiktaalik.
Albertans.
This fish lizard guy. And they found several specimens. It wasn't one individual. In other words, they made a prediction that this animal would be found, and it was found. So far, Mr. Ham and his worldview, the Ken Ham creation model, does not have this capability. It cannot make predictions and
I think that's
show
a great
results. Here's an extraordinary.
So one of the big thing, I think that's a great point. So one of the most important things that you can do to show that an idea in science has merit is to make predictions. And also, if you can't make predictions, that goes a long ways towards making your idea unfalsifiable, which means it's just not part of science. It might be part of something else, but that thing isn't science. And so the fact that
the predictions need to be falsifiable, as you said.
Right. So not only does evolution make falsifiable predictions, so not only does evolution make falsifiable predictions, those predictions are frequently found to be correct. So like when we started getting like fossil evidence that linked, say, whales to artiodactyls, which are the even-toed ungulates like deer and cows and sheep and whatnot, and giraffes. Later, molecular evidence, DNA evidence, said yes, in fact, whales genetically are also nested within the even-toed ungulates. In fact, their closest relatives are hippos, which are a group of even-toed ungulates.
I think that there's
without
something
evolution, you wouldn't make that prediction.
I think there's something to be said too, is like not to devalue the trial and error that it took to get to that point. It's not like they just knew that they just kind of were like, oh, well, we were just right the whole time. It was like, okay, well, what do we expect to see and why do we expect to see it there? And then it was just a matter of trial and error all the way until we were able to finally start narrowing it down into knowing what these things meant. It's like when we do Volcano Watch, right, Landon? We don't know enough about volcanoes across the board or have the data that we need to make accurate predictions consistently, which is why we're fucking wrong all the time. But we're only wrong all the time. But we have to be wrong before we can be correct. Because then we have to learn what were we expecting to see, and then what did we see, and what were we wrong, and what were the things that we weren't looking at that we need to focus on more.
Good point.
One that I find remarkable. There are certain fish, the top minnows, that have the remarkable ability to have sex with other fish, traditional fish sex, and they can have sex with themselves. Now, one of the old questions in life science, everybody. One of the old...
Do they actually have sex with themselves, or are they just able to procreate with a single individual?
So that's going to vary based on species. There are, in fact, species that do what's called self-crossing, where they actually fertilize ovocytes with their own spermatozoon. And the advantage to that is that it helps break up linkage blocks among their DNA, and it can also remove deleterious alleles. But the downside is that resulting organisms can have, like your total reproductive output tends to be a little bit lower per generation than just straight up cloning. So it's there are organisms that in fact can mate with themselves, so-called, and there are also asexually reproducing organisms that do not do that.
But is it having sex, though?
I mean, is it having sex when two fish swim next to each other and both expel their gametes into the water? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So like, if I learned anything from the Magic School Bus and the episode about them going into the water and following the salmon, they all of the children getting jizzed on by a fish when they were inside eggs. I feel like I learned that there wasn't, like, any penetration going on, and so, like, the lack of penetration means yes sex, no sex. Like, right now people are arguing about, like, what counts as sex all the time.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not an expert in the biological definition of what that means.
So
it's having okay. I think Smitty's got the best answer. He said it's having sex, but it's not fucking.
There you go. I mean,
you know what? You're right.
From the standpoint of like biology, it's a question that I don't think anyone's trying to answer, because it's like one of those like, what counts as quote unquote sex is a human convention, and we're not talking about humans. So who cares? That's fair.
Alright, I guess we won't get a drink for that one. guess he's right.
Well,
sort of
he's not wrong.
Is why does any organism, whether you're an ash tree, a sea jelly, a squid, a marmot, why does anybody have sex? I mean, there are more bacteria in your tummy right now than there are humans on Earth. And bacteria, they don't bother with that, man. They just like split themselves in half. They get new bacteria. Like, let's get her done. Let's go. But why does think of all the trouble a rosebush goes to.
Now,
wow.
Did that joke land or not? Now,
it landed for me.
Okay.
We'll drink for a joke that didn't land, though, because it did. Just because I laughed, I am not a good measure for that.
That's still the audience has got, of course, the audience is sitting there saying, this is an evil person spewing the lies of Satan. We must maintain a mean. Unless you're, I guess, Aaron. Well, you said Aaron's in the audience?
Yeah.
As far as I know, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good for him.
He was there for it.
The flower and the thorns and the bees swimming, flying around, interacting. Why does anybody bother with all that? And the answer seems to be your enemies. And your enemies are not lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, no. Your enemies are
he got a laugh on that one.
And parasites. That's what's going to get you. Germs and parasites. My first cousin's son died tragically from essentially the flu. This is not some story I heard about. It's my first cousin once removed. Because apparently the virus had the right genes to attack his genes. So when you...
That made it sound like it was somebody you didn't actually know. It was my first cousin once removed. And a friend of a friend of mine.
I've known a lot of first cousins once removed.
I agree that it's probably not. I'm saying it makes it sound that way.
Okay. I've actually also known some like second and third cousins once and twice removed and not removed, and it's not that unusual to know your distant cousins.
I don't think it's that unusual. I just the way it sounds when you say no, this is like somebody I knew. It was my second cousin twice removed, or my cousin once removed. It makes it sound like it's more distant than you just said, no, this actually happened to just my cousin or my close relative.
I think also part of it might be that a lot of people don't know what the removed or even the numbers of cousinhood are. I've had to explain that to more people than I thought I would ever need to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've had a lot of people say, like, what does it mean to be a second cousin? Or what does it mean to be a first cousin once removed?
Why are people asking you this? Just Google it.
People ask me everything, Chesh. What are you talking about?
Well,
but how do you
that's
say it in
because
Klingon?
I don't know how to say
You're a dinosaur that's been around a while,
Yeah, that's accurate.
right? And you picked up a number of things.
Inkboy for 2 says, do we drink on a joke that didn't land in, though?
Oh, good question.
I think that's worth a drink.
Well
I think
done.
that
Well
joke
done.
is worth a drink. Also, Steve Areno said, I skipped a first cousin once removed's birthday to watch Chapper's 10K show.
Well, happy birthday to your cousin once removed.
And I hope you had a good time on the 10K show. I had fun. I definitely came in busting through the door like I was Shrek coming out of the bathroom.
Yeah, you did.
It was a nice
And hey,
show. I like it.
So one thing I'm hoping to do is I'm hoping to take the Hollow Knight game that I played while trying to debunk this, and doing the same thing, but starting with that same file, and I'm hoping to try to actually beat the game during the birthday stream.
Oh,
Because,
we get a continuation.
Yeah, I think the only things I strictly need to beat the game still are the Dream Nail, to defeat the Watchers, and to get the Mothwing Cloak. I don't think I even need the Shade Dash if I don't want it. I probably do. Yeah. But I think those are the only things left I need to actually beat the game. And getting the Watchers is not that hard. Yeah, so.
He says this and then proceeds to spend 2 hours doing it.
Well, I'll also be trying to, juggle guests at debunking.
Yeah. Of that show, you'll find some large primes.
Yes, you
can't miss it.
Yeah.
Just look for lots of digits.
Landon had quite the comment involving large prime numbers.
Oh boy.
Oh yeah.
Have sex, you have a new set of genes, you have a new mixture. So people studied these top minnows, and they found that the ones
what about the bottom minnows?
Reproduced sexually had fewer parasites than the ones that reproduced on their own. This black spot disease. Wait, there's more. In these populations, with flooding and so on, with river ponds get isolated, then they dry up, then the river flows again. In between, some of the fish will have sex with other fish sometimes, and they'll have sex on their own, what's called asexually. And those fish, the ones that are in between, sometimes this, sometimes that, they have an intermediate number of infections. In other words, the explanation provided by evolution made a prediction. And the prediction's extraordinary and subtle, but there it is. How else would you explain it? And to Mr. Ham and his followers, I say this is something that we in science want. We want the ability to predict. And your assertion that there's some difference between the natural laws that I use to observe the world today and the natural laws that existed 4,000 years ago is extraordinary and unsettling. I travel around. I have a great many family members in Danville, Virginia, one of the U.S.'s most livable cities. It's lovely. And I was driving along, and there was a sign in front of a church, Big Bang Theory, you got to be kidding me, God. Now, everybody, why would...
Is there no punctuation?
I don't think those sign kits come with much punctuation.
Big Bang Theory, you've got to be kidding me, God.
Yeah, I think those things only come with colons, so you can put in time and maybe some exclamation marks or something. I don't think they have a lot of commas and apostrophes or anything.
I mean, yeah, but
I don't really know.
I think they have quotations pretty commonly, don't they not?
Then again, maybe they do have a whole bunch of commas, and these guys just suck. I don't know.
But maybe the church just hasn't lost all the commas.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they are very small. I'm sure they'd be easy. No, because that's permanent.
What do you mean?
Those signs are they have...
Oh.
Yeah, but those aren't dry erase board signs, right? Those are signs that you slot letters onto that have little pokey out bits. and they slot into
You say
grooves.
like,
If you
55
draw,
million people served. Or something.
yeah, like and those grooves are usually made of something that's relatively soft and a
Okay,
little
but
bit
they
on the
gotta have
absorbent
like
side.
a dash, right? They gotta have a dash. If
Yeah,
you put like
they
Big
probably had
Bang
something.
Theory, you gotta be kidding me. Dash God, like it's God speaking here. Is that what it's supposed to be?
Yeah,
I think it's supposed to be like you're addressing God, but maybe it's supposed to be attributed to God.
I think they probably meant to say Big Bang Theory. You got to be kidding me. Sign God, right, or from God.
Yeah.
Or God
I
say
thought
that,
it was.
right?
I thought it was like. I thought it was they're saying that to God, but maybe you're right. And you know what would have helped disambiguate it? Punctuation.
Punctuation. Vandalia for 5 said, so how many cousins, so many times removed are penguins to dino species?
Uh,
A lot.
I'm not sure I understand that question.
I think they're asking, like, if are penguins... Were penguins dinosaurs, and how far out would they be?
From,
like, their closest dinosaur relative.
well, their closest dinosaur relative would just be like the albatross.
Oh, okay. So I think they're going for, like, featherless, but then again, it's likely that they weren't featherless.
Well, yeah, so that's one of the problems is that the first dinosaur probably had at least proto-feathers. But another bigger problem is that kinship terms for human families are genealogical terms, and the relationships between taxa, like penguins and other dinosaur species, are phylogenetic relationships, and you do not use the same set of terms.
It's just imagine the kid from The Emperor's New Groove that's talking to Yzma while skipping, just being like, great, 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 following her around the house.
Yeah, so one of the problems is that species do not have the same kinds of relationships as
they're
human
asking
genealogical
how
trees
close. Oh, they're asking how far away, essentially, your dinosaur is.
Right.
Yeah.
You cannot use terms like cousin in the same sense meaningfully as you do in human genealogy, as you do in species phylogeny. So there's no actual answer that is a true answer to that question. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like asking it's sort of like asking how heavy is sadness. Like, I don't know, 4 pounds. It's like these aren't really
weight?
Units that you can. Yeah, like they're not really units that you can use in this discussion. Now,
obviously,
I suppose if you
pounds,
have perfect,
because that's what sadness would.
Exactly.
So you would use pound units.
Yeah. So it's sort of a category error to ask how many like cousin steps removed penguins are from, say, Ceratosaurus, because those aren't the kinds of things that are in a genealogical relationship. Now, is there an underlying genealogy for which you could, if you had perfect knowledge, come up with some number for it? Then I mean, kind of, I guess. But I mean, no one has that knowledge, so
right. There's no way to know. Savage Cobra for 5 said, this is more sex education than half the audience has ever gotten.
Someone at the church, a pastor, for example, put that sign up. Unless he or she didn't believe that the Big Bang was a real thing. I just want to review briefly with everybody why we accept, in the outside world, why we accept the Big Bang.
Fair.
Edwin Hubble. Oh, sorry, there you go. You got to be kidding me, God. Edwin Hubble was sitting at Mount Wilson, which is up from Pasadena, California. On a clear day, you can look down and see where the Rose Parade goes. It's that close to civilization. But even in the early 1900s, the people who selected this site for astronomy picked an excellent site. The clouds and smog are below you. And Edwin Hubble sat there at this very big telescope night after night studying the heavens. And he found that the stars are moving apart. The stars are moving apart. And he wasn't sure why, but it was clear that the stars are moving farther and farther apart all the time.
All right, we should pause here.
So people talk.
It's not the stars, it's galaxies. the individual stars that you're going to see with Hubble's telescope are primarily going to be within the Milky Way, and the Milky Way is not itself expanding according to the Hubble constant. Certain stars within the Milky Way are moving towards or away from Earth at various speeds, and that's all due to things like, the orbits of the stars in the Milky Way. What he was observing were what at the time were considered to just be nebulae, that were thought to be within what we now call the Milky Way, which was thought to just be the universe. But he was noticing that there were these great redshifts associated with them. And so then that got the idea rolling that, hey, maybe the universe is bigger than just this Milky Way and whatever little things might be hanging around it. Maybe these nebulae are actually whole star clusters like the Milky Way, which then greatly expanded the conception of how big the universe is. So to say that the stars were moving away is, I would say, simplifying it to the point of it being wrong.
And to say that what Edmund Hubble was doing was using the 100-inch, I think it was a 100-inch observatory to take images of stars, individual stars in, for example, initially in Andromeda, and moreover, he found certain stars in Andromeda. So it was no longer just a nebulous gas clouds, where the nebulae was a term which meant
right. Now we're realizing it's got its own stars inside there.
Yeah, and so he then began to image individual stars. He noticed that some of those stars were variable. Some of those variables were a particular type of variable called a Cepheid variable, which comes from a sort of there's a constellation Cepheus where there's a particularly good example of a Cepheid variable. That's why they're called that. And he was then able to measure the rate at which this variable star changed. And that rate, according to the model, is proportionate to its absolute brightness. Knowing how absolutely bright it was, he could determine how far away it was, or make an initial estimate. Now, his estimates were off a bit, but again, he's at that time, Hubble's at the time, sort of pushing the edge of technology of just being able to image individual stars in another galaxy.
How would you approach explaining this then instead to a scientifically illiterate audience? Because I
would have just said galaxies instead of stars.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
that's it.
And I would say
we went into the redshift, and I'm like, I don't know how you're gonna get that across.
Use observations to measure, to approximate distances to these remote objects that were thought of early on as just a pile of gas, now are stars like our sun out there. And
also, as far as introducing redshift to an audience, it's the same phenomenon as the Doppler effect that you can hear anytime a car goes, driving past you on the street, where, you can talk about how, you hear the higher pitch as it's approaching and the lower pitch as it passes you. Well, that's the same thing that happens with light. Lower frequency light is towards the red end. Higher frequency is towards the blue end. So when we say redshift, it just means that the light is stretching out as the source recedes, just like the sound waves stretch out as the car passes you. So that's actually, I think, one of the easier things to get across in terms of astronomy to a lay audience who isn't well acquainted with it, because the Doppler effect is a part of everyday life for most people.
I'm sure he's using the term stars loosely, but I agree with you that using the term galaxy is definitely better. One, because it's more accurate, and two, because it gives a better scope of size. Because people think of a star and they're thinking of a little dot in the sky, right? And that little dot is actually a massive galaxy, not even just an individual star. So I do like the idea of trying to introduce people who are lay people when it comes to science literacy with these idea of the scope of the size of things we're talking about, because this is how you end up with flat earthers. They don't understand the scope and size of the thing that they're talking about. That's just my thoughts, though. What do I know?
About it for a couple decades.
There's not much.
And then
there's not much different, I think, intellectually between your typical young Earth creationist and your typical flat earther.
I agree.
Probably the young Earth creationists, there are fewer trolls where there are flat Earth trolls.
I think there's more honest young Earth creationists that you would if you're just run into one on the street.
Well, it's funny you should say honest and young Earth creationist. That's an interesting juxtaposition.
I think that I just think there's a difference between like the people who have grown up in the church and learned this, and this is like the only thing that they really know, versus like your Ken Ham, right? So I just suspect that more people have come by young Earth creationist young Earth creationism honestly than I think people have come across flat Earth. Thanks.
Yeah, I do. Like, as far as I know, no adults in the world have been raised in a setting where everyone around them that they were interacting with on a daily basis was a flat earther. That is not the case for creationists. There are places where you can go where you can grow up and all of your friends will be creationists of some type or another. You will go to church and everyone there will be a creationist. The schools will be hesitant to even mention evolution because the population is so heavily creationist. And I'm thinking about places like the Bible Belt in the USA, which, in case people listening aren't very familiar with the US's geography, there's an area towards the southern part of the eastern United States, that eastern coast, that extends sort of a little bit past the Appalachian Mountains. It's called the Bible Belt, and it has a very, very high level of religiosity, church attendance, specifically within fundamentalist Protestant groups. And when I say fundamentalist, I mean like that's a self-identification term. They call themselves that. So, which is not the case for a lot of other religious groups that people call fundamentalist, which is why I'm pointing it out.
Just being specific.
Another astronomer, almost a couple decades, another astronomer, Fred Hoyle, just remarked, well, it was like there was a big bang. There was an explosion. This is to say, since everything's moving apart, it's very reasonable that at one time they were all together.
Technically, I think that was a lie right there. So Fred Hoyle did not believe in the Big Bang. He only said this after Hubble's discoveries. He was referring to the discoveries of Georges Lemaitre, who was a Vatican astronomer and Jesuit priest. And Fred Hoyle was using this derisively. He was saying, oh, there's some kind of, what is this, a Big Bang? And the name did catch on. But saying that an astronomer, Fred Hoyle, said, oh, it's as if there was a Big Bang. No, he said the exact opposite. He was like, there is no such thing as this. This is all nonsense. In fact, he accused people who believe in the Big Bang of being too taken with Genesis because he didn't like the idea that there was a start to the universe, which is something that he thought agreed too heavily with the Bible, which also the Jesuit priest who basically came up with the idea liked the idea specifically because it gave a start point to the universe, which corresponded to his beliefs about God having created the universe at a certain point in the past. Now, I'm not here to argue whether or not the finite nature of the history of the universe indicates that there's a God or not. I don't really care what you think about that. But to say that, Fred Hoyle was like, oh yeah, I mean, it seems like there was some kind of Big Bang. Yeah, that makes sense. And then just continue on. That's just not true. That's not what Fred Hoyle was doing.
Not quite what happened. So take a drink for that one.
I mean, part of one thing that Dr. Hoyle was involved in early on as an astronomer was in nuclear synthesis, right? And understanding how stars, did their thing, right? And so a lot of the modern notion of something he had papers, in the late 40s, early 50s that talked about essentially how stars will evolve, to temperatures of much hotter than, for example, you could get in chemical fires, and sort of understanding that thing was there. That being said, he had concerns and objections to the Big Bang model, and he was challenging the assumption of Hubble's observed expansion to and he was asking, I think, some important questions. Now, part of, I guess, his problem was that I think he ended up getting too tied into his challenging of the thing to see the evidence being brought forward. But the other thing, I don't know if you know Dapper, that he was also a staunch critic of theories of abiogenesis. Explain the origin of life.
Yes, in fact, he was also even Yes, he was even a critic of evolutionary biology. In fact, he rather famously co-authored a paper contending that the feathers of Archaeopteryx were in fact chicken feathers that had been pressed into a thin layer of cement on the slab, which
I feel like I've heard that before.
yeah, Kent Hovind likes that claim. It actually originates with Fred Hoyle and an associate, and it's I don't know how to express to not people who aren't much into paleontology how ridiculous it is, but it's sort of like saying that like the Mona Lisa hanging in the Louvre is a fake because actually it's made from crayons. And then you just go look at it and you're like, nope, no, it's not. Look at it. It's right here. Because the thing is, like, the Archaeopteryx is a fossil from the Solnhofen limestone, a very well known, from a very well known core that was used for lithography. So lithography is like, you take the slab of stone, you carve something into it, and then you press that on ink, and then you press that ink on whatever you're trying to print on. And it has to be very, very fine-grained stone for this. And so the Solnhofen limestone is very well known. In fact, that's why it's called Archaeopteryx lithographica, because it was taken from lithographic limestone. And so the idea that there would be cement on here and that no one would have noticed the cement on this limestone is just completely insane. There's just no chance. Plus, you add on to that the feathers are exactly mirrored on the counter slab, because the thing you're familiar with is the slab that has the bones, but the opposite side of that is called the counter slab, and it has the impressions of the bones and the impressions of the feathers. And the feathers match up exactly on both the slab and the counter slab, which would require like micrometer precision from some guy with wet cement and a chicken feather.
Oh no.
That's not how any of that works.
Oh,
so
no.
yeah, Fred Hoyle made some very important contributions to science, right? Especially in the areas of nucleosynthesis, and I do not want to detract from that. However, the guy was batshit and just a contrarian for most of his life, and so most of the things he ever said, I think, are best ignored. Yeah.
And part of the thing of this, really, again, he did really important work in helping explain the physics of fusion in stars, and that I think was why he became prominence. However, he kind of confused asking questions about and challenging an idea with opinion, and so
I'm just asking questions.
It got to be quite irrational. I mean, I think he got to be quite irrational, because
agreed.
Unlike for example, someone like Fermi, who says make a splash in an area, make waves, and move on to something else. He kept dogmatically back to, well, this is how stars are evolved, and we don't need to have all this other stuff coming.
He sounds like the type of
when he was presented with strong evidence about the Big Bang, he kept going back to almost like a creationist. Yeah, but what about this, right? Where is the missing link? He kept making those things, and people would explain to him. And sad thing is he sort of got lost because he refused to understand the explanation of things.
Sounds like one of those types of people who just gets like kind of stuck up their own ass in a field that isn't their profession.
I think so. There's some other controversies he has. That being said, he had a main important contribution. I think, on the other hand, his refusal to look at the data. Some people were skeptical of Big Bang models and things like Lemaitre put out, and that's scientifically correct, being skeptical. So they went out and tested it. But the thing is that they did measurements that kept confirming a Big Bang hypothesis.
You can be skeptical without being an asshole, also, by the way.
Yes, and also a big part of skepticism is that when there is sufficient evidence, that you then go ahead and accept the claim. Which is one of the things that a lot of people confuse. Skeptical isn't the same thing as just doubter or denier.
Yeah.
Skeptics accept claims when there is sufficient evidence and do not do so when there is insufficient evidence, and will also reject claims when there is sufficient negative evidence.
Yep.
That is the important thing about being a skeptic. It's not just saying, I don't believe you.
And the nuance that comes in there tends to be about what do you think is a reasonable amount of evidence to change your mind, and that's going to be a personal thing. But it's important to understand that if you are not the professional in that field, if this is not the thing you study, at some point you're gonna have to have a little bit of trust in what's being presented to you. At some point. Otherwise, like, how would you even take directions from Google Maps?
So, but you know, if you look at, you know, one of the things he was talking about, you know, that he was, you know, Davies sort of described Hoyle as being essentially, you know, that he was, you know, in love with his maverick personality. And Hoyle's response was, well, it's better to be interesting and wrong than boring and right.
Oh, yeah, he's one of those.
I mean,
All right,
look, if that's your personal choice, I can't tell you that you can't make it, but it's not going to be something that's going to make you like a well-respected person in the future.
Now,
yeah.
I also know that later on, for example, in Cambridge, there were colleagues that just couldn't stand him because he confused being a prominent scientist that had skeptics with just being a nuh-uh type of thing, right? And
Right.
so he actually, you know, ended up resigning or from Cambridge for stuff.
Interesting.
He had problems, right? He was a person who had problems.
That's fair. Don't we all? We are coming up to the hour 20-minute at this point, so I think it'd be a good time to go refill our drinks, go to the bathroom if you need to go to the bathroom, and we will be right back.
We.
Hello! I'm not sure if we're all back yet, but I do want to take this time to thank you for joining us, and thank you for liking, subscribing, for sharing, becoming a member if you're a member. Enjoy your emotes that are down there. Feel free to join us on other platforms. Links are in the description, and feel free to check out Landon and Dapper on their own stuff, which is also linked in the description down below. So,
yeah, I've already streamed like 10 hours in the last week.
Oh, poor.
Yeah, you're a very streamy dinosaur.
I streamed
must say.
6
Yeah, well-
hours yesterday, and then today.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's gonna be a long. I was actually looking at my June calendar and I was like, God damn, I'm gonna be busy this month.
Oh no.
That's okay.
All right. Are we ready to get back into this? You guys got your drinks?
Yeah, I got a beer.
What are,
Yep.
yeah, what are we all drinking?
I'm drinking a Four Peaks peach golden ale, which I'm trying for the first time. Well, I tried it for the first time yesterday for Kent with Bent, and I probably won't buy it again, but it's not terrible.
I am drinking Henry Whitehart's Private Reserve, a lager that's found up here in the
Nice.
Pacific Northwest. It's quite yummy.
So we're all drinking beer today. I got myself a Sleeman.
Well, after this,
There's
I'm
nothing
probably
special
going to
about
switch
it. It's
to
just
water because I only have so much beer.
And
Also,
I
we
didn't want to
drinking-
have.
I welcome to the shit show.
I didn't have high calorie
Yeah.
content because I need to, in about 6 hours or so, go to Canada for some curry because there's a really good curry house on the other side of the border.
I have not had good curry in a long, long time. And that makes me want to go over some curry. Alright. Let's go.
Place from whence these things expanded. And it was a remarkable insight. But people went still questioning it for decades. Conventional scientists questioning it for decades. These two researchers wanted to listen for radio signals from space, radio astronomy. And this is, while we have visible light for our eyes, there's a whole nother bunch of waves of light that are much longer. The microwaves in your oven are about that long. The radar at the airport is about that long. Your FM radio signals about like this. AM radio signals are a kilometer. They're several soccer fields. They went out listening.
How many
hiss.
washing tubs long is it? And is it a Canadian football field in size?
At
or
least he's
American?
not measuring things in half giraffe sizes. So
Oh,
there's that.
How many deer? 2.5. How many apples tall are you? Hello Kitty is 3.5 apples tall. I am drinking just for Americans measuring anything with everything except for the metric system.
Most
Or just
Americans
units
are
in general.
Are
Yeah, just
metrically
actual
challenged.
units. Whoops, sorry. Hold on. That wasn't supposed to happen. Sorry. Go ahead. Say again, Landon.
Most Americans, while they're metrically challenged, Canadians are metrically dimorphic or all over the map.
My dimorphic. That's Canada. That's Canada for sure. I can't even say anything to that. It's just funny. How many arcs long?
This tss, all the time that wouldn't go away. And they thought, oh, doggone it, there's some loose connector. They plugged in the connector. They re-screwed it. They made it tight. They turned it this way. The hiss was still there. They heard it that way. It's just still there. They thought it was pigeon droppings that had affected the reception of this horn. It's
True
called.
that.
This thing is still there. It's in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. It's a National Historic Site. And Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson had found this cosmic background sound that was predicted by astronomers.
You got something for us, Landon?
Well, I think that's up there. And in fact, one of them went on to become a director of Bell Labs, a very important research place. Fun, really fun guy. But that black body curve you see is also something that was, predicted by various, helped developed by Planck, and it was later on. One of the things to me, it's not. The really solid confirmation that this stuff happens was things like the Kobe, the early explorers of the microwave spectrum, and saw produced this graph, that same kind of graph you see in there of the actual measurement out in space, not having the atmosphere to create distortions, and it was a really extraordinary confirmation of a prediction of the Big Bang model about the temperature of the universe and the shape of that curve. And I remember, when Kobe, the first really good microwave surveyor went out in space and observed it, and in the meeting where they announced the result, they put up a graph and a line, and you saw the classical. That's a very classical Planck type black body graph. And when they said, and here's the data, and it looked like the graph had changed, and they said, well, there's error bars on it. But the error bars are smaller than the width of the line, right? That it was extraordinary fit to what was a Big Bang model prediction. And so these folks were the first ones to detect it and do a survey and say it's actually extrasolar out in space. Why is the extrasolar? Because they observed it at different times of the year. So it was the sun interfering and so forth, and showed this bath of photons coming to us, redshifted from the days when the universe went from translucent to transparent. And hydrogen went neutral, and we had a Big Bang flash. And we now have very extraordinary details of it. Again, these are all predictions made by the Big Bang model that, if they turned out to be wrong, would have falsified the Big Bang model. That's how science works, not dogma.
Yeah, that's the important thing. Is, it could have been shown to be wrong, and then scientists would have largely changed their mind, which is not what you get in creationism.
Numbers, doing math, predicted that in the cosmos would be left over this echo, this energy from the Big Bang that would be detectable. And they detected it. We built the Cosmic Observatory for Background Emissions, the COBE spacecraft, and it matched exactly the astronomers' predictions. You got to respect that. It's a wonderful thing. Now, along that line is some interest in the age of the Earth. Right now, it's generally agreed that the Big Bang happened 13.7 billion years ago. What we can do on Earth, these elements that we all know on the
if I could just
periodic
make
table
a
of chemicals.
point, this is a nit thing, but one of the things I think is important to do is to help you understand that if it doesn't have error bars, it's probably not science. And so what you're really going to say is not it's 3.8 billion years ago, happy birthday universe. You say 13 point, again, well, I would say right now, I would say 13.7 billion years ago, plus or minus 140 million years. I think it's always good to have error bars when you talk about something scientific, not to say, today is the universe's birthday. Happy birthday, universe.
Right, it's not that specific. It's definitely like a larger thing. Do you think that's super, like, how much value do you put on Bill Nye mentioning that during his thing? His presentation?
I think it's a matter of good form, right? I think because when you make absolute statements, if you say the Big Bang model is correct, it is how the universe made 13.8 billion years ago, where your number is. When you start making those definitive numbers, you end up being wrong, as opposed to trying to explain something more of it's the Big Bang event occurred 13.7. Right now we would say 13.74 billion years ago, plus or minus 140 million years, or you say about 13.7 billion years ago.
It's one of those things where you've kind of got to, when you're doing this kind of a presentation to this audience at this time period, you've kind of got to walk this line to make decisions about what do you want to say that is like definitive, and what do you want to say that is you give that additional birth to. Because it would really suck if you do this whole presentation and then somebody goes home and Googles like age of the Earth and it's not the exact number you said, but you also don't want to present everything as if it has these margin of error for everything, because otherwise you're going to end up accidentally rhetorically sounding like there's nothing definitive about anything that you're saying, which is not the case. No? Yes? No?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Screw you guys.
Okay, bye.
No, wait, no.
Even ones we don't know were created when stars explode. And I look like nobody, but I attended a lecture by Hans Bethe, who won a Nobel Prize for discovering the process by which stars create all these elements. The one that interests me especially is our good friends rubidium and strontium. Rubidium becomes strontium spontaneously. It's an interesting thing to me. A neutron becomes a proton, and it goes up the periodic table. When lava comes out of the ground, molten lava, and it freezes, turns to rock, when the melt solidifies or crystallizes, it locks the rubidium and strontium in place. And so by careful assay, by being diligent, you can tell when the rock froze. You can tell how old the rubidium and strontium are, and you can get an age for the Earth. When that stuff falls on fossils, you can get a very good idea of how old the fossils are. I encourage you all to go to Nebraska, go to Ashfall State Park, and see the astonishing fossils. It looks like a Hollywood movie. There are rhinoceroses, there are three-toed horses in Nebraska. None of those animals are extant today, and they were buried catastrophically by a volcano in what is now Idaho, is now Yellowstone National Park. What's called the hot spot, people call it the super volcano.
I'm drinking
and it's
for
a remarkable thing.
Yellowstone.
Apparently, as I can tell you, as a Northwesterner around for Mount St. Helens, full disclosure, I'm on the Mount St. Helens board. When it goes off, it gives out a great deal of gas that's toxic and knock these animals out.
Sounds just
Looking
like
for relief,
me.
they go to a watering hole, and then when the ash comes, they were all buried. It's an extraordinary place. Now, if in the bad old days you had heart problems.
By the way, a hint: when volcanoes are going boom and they're cranky, don't go in front of them. Go behind, because
Obligatory don't swim in lava warning here.
well, yeah, and yes, I was at the Mount St. Helens eruption when it occurred, but we were in a safe spot, not in front of the cannon. We were behind the
On
mountain,
the other
so-
hand, if you want to be known throughout history somehow and have creationists and young Earth creationists arguing about you and your bones, go ahead, jump in lava. Maybe something will survive.
I don't think even your bones are going to get through that.
No, they're really not. Don't do that.
Would right away cut you open. Now we use a drug based on rubidium to look at the inside of your heart without cutting you open. Now, my Kentucky friends, I want you to consider this. Right now, there is no place in the Commonwealth of Kentucky to get a degree in this kind of nuclear medicine, this kind of drugs associated with that. I hope you find that troubling. I hope
That is
you're concerned
interesting. I
about
didn't know that.
You want scientifically literate students in your Commonwealth for a better tomorrow for everybody. You can't get this here. You have to go out of state. Now, as far as the distance to stars, understand this is very well understood. It's February. We look at a star in February, we measure an angle to it, we wait 6 months, we look at that same star again, and we measure that angle. It's the same way carpenters built this building. It's the same way surveyors surveyed the land that we're standing on. And so by measuring the distance to a star, you can figure out how far away it is, that star, and then the stars beyond it and stars beyond that. There are billions of stars,
Trigonometry.
more than 6,000 light years from here. A light year is a unit of distance, not a unit of time. There are billions of stars. Mr. Ham, how could there be billions of stars more distant than 6,000 years if the world's only 6,000 years old? It's an extraordinary claim. There's another astronomer, Adolf Kittel, who remarked first about the reasonable man. Is it reasonable that we have ice older by a factor of 100 than you claim the Earth is? We have trees that have more tree rings than the Earth is old. That we have rocks with rubidium and strontium and uranium and potassium argon dating that are far, far, far older than you claim the Earth is. Could anybody have built an ark that would sustain better than any ark anybody was able to build on the Earth? So if you're asking me, and I got the impression you were, is Ken Ham's creation model viable? I say no. Absolutely not. Now, one last thing.
I agree.
You may not know that in the U.S. Constitution, from the Founding Fathers, is the sentence to promote the progress of science and useful arts. Kentucky voters who might be watching online in places like Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Kansas. Please, you don't want to raise a generation of science students who don't understand how we know our place in the cosmos, our place in space, who don't understand natural law. We need to innovate to keep the United States where it is in the world. Thank you very much.
I found the part. Any final thoughts about his kind of presentation? Because I found the part that he brought up about Kentucky lacking fields like universities for specific fields of study very interesting. Like I had no idea about that.
It is, but I think you could find that most states have certain types of degrees that just are not offered by any in-state schools. Sure. So I think it's rhetorically effective. I think if you dig too far into it, you might find that, like, yeah, okay, fine, but, like, say, Massachusetts lacks any schools where you can get an Egyptology degree, and Colorado lacks any schools where you can get, like, a theoretical mathematics degree or something.
There's certainly an issue with specificity. Yeah.
I guess what Ken Ham was trying to do to the crowd and the audience,
you mean Bill Nye?
Sympathetic this. Ken Ham was saying, this is God's way of doing things. Now, Bill Nye turned around and says, well, science does all these amazing things. Well, science does all these amazing things. Don't discard science because bad things will happen.
Right.
Is that a kind of a fair summary?
Yeah, an interesting lean into the political at the end there, where and I don't know if that was necessarily a good idea with this particular crowd, because I would personally be concerned about they're going to. Oh no, this is 2014, so maybe it wasn't as bad then as it is currently. But it's like, oh my god, it's just a political agenda, blah blah blah, Satan,
I mean, this crowd is going to do that no matter what.
I mean, that's fair, but if you blatantly give them, like, the cookie to do it with, you know what I mean? I don't know. It's one of those things where it's a toss-up that, like, if that's how you're going to do it, maybe it deserves a little bit more time than he gave, but I
think rhetorically it was probably reasonably effective.
That's fair.
And like I said, in terms of is it an honest point to make? It needs a lot more context, but the thing is it's a rhetorical point. He's not trying to say that because Kentucky does not have a place where you can study nuclear medicine, therefore evolution is true and the flood didn't happen. He's just using it as a propaganda point. And I think for what he's using it as, I think it was reasonably effective. But like I said, if you're critically thinking about it, you should probably want to have more questions answered than just that. So,
and that might also be the point, right? To get them to be like, wait, really? Is that the case? And then look into it and then figure out whatever issues there are for themselves. Like, he's handing them an open-ended question to then, if they find that tidbit compelling, to then go beyond, which I think is a very good idea to do in this type of debate in this setting. Savage Cobra for 2 said, the light traveled the light years in 12 parsecs.
Oh dear. Another funny Star Wars reference.
That's a lot to take in. I hope everybody's holding up well. It's a lot of information. What we're going to have now is a 5-minute rebuttal time for each gentleman to address the other one's comments, and then there will be a 5-minute counter-rebuttal after that. Things are going to start moving a little more quickly now. So at this point in particular, I want to make sure you don't have applauding or anything else going on that slows
How well
it down.
do you think they will actually address the points the other person made? Or how well will they cherry pick on that?
So from my memory, because I have seen this before, Ham basically face plants, and while Nye has some salient points, he also says some fairly dumb things about the Bible that are not true, and that I think that particular audience will then use that as an excuse to believe less of what he says overall. So from what I remember, he's about to make some rather significant tactical blunders.
This is where the true debate begins, We needed to get their points down, their presentations down. Now is when the drinking starts.
Oh, good.
If you'd like to begin with your 5-minute rebuttal first.
We're going to try and get through his 5-minute rebuttal, and then we'll probably stop there, depending on how you guys feel about time.
Good, sure.
Well, first of all, Bill, if I was to answer all the points that you brought up, the moderator would think I was going on for millions of years. So I can only deal with some of them. And you mentioned the age of the Earth a couple of times, so let me deal with that. As I said in my presentation, you can't observe the age of the Earth, and I would say that comes under what we call historical origin science. Now, just to understand, so you understand where I'm coming from, yes, we admit we build our origins of historical science on the Bible. The Bible says God created in 6 days. The Hebrew word yom, as it's used in Genesis 1 with evening, morning number, means an ordinary day. Adam was made on day 6. And so when you add up all those genealogies specifically given in the Bible.
Again, he made a comment about language in Hebrew. Any comments on those that understand linguistics?
That would be Dapper. I can barely speak English.
Well, so he definitely mispronounced the word yom from Hebrew, which means day. To be fair to him, though, I also frequently mispronounce it, but that's because I tend to replace it with the Arabic word for day, which is yaum. So that's my excuse, because I'm better at Arabic than I am at Hebrew, because I took 3 semesters of it in college. So there's that. Although you learn surprisingly little of Arabic in 3 semesters, I'll tell you. Here's the thing, right? There are good arguments to be made that the author of the account in Genesis 1, because there are different authors in Genesis, intended for those days to be literal days. However, I do not think that Christians are under any particular obligation to accept authorial intent as their primary hermeneutical framework. So I would suggest that they just not do that.
Just don't.
In which case, yeah. Because here's the thing, right? Authorial intent is cool and all, but it's not all there is to a text, right? If you read a book and you find meaning in it that the author didn't intend, that doesn't mean that you didn't find the meaning in it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, from Adam to Abraham.
I do think that we should also, by the way, drink again for his stupid misrepresentation of there being 2 different types of science, like observational science and historical science, just because I think that deserves a drink, because I hate that nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean, I think why Kinham has to do it, being sort of infected with this dogma, he has to take and try to dismiss something which impacts because it impacts his dogma. Again, part of it, he's saying, my dogma is right, and true science agrees with it, and this fake science called, what is the term, can be dismissed so that only the true science comes up with it. It really kind of an odd thing, because rather than taking it on faith and accepting that, he really is worshiping science and saying, but I'm going to discard the bits of science I don't like and leave behind scientific-like things that bolster my faith. His faith is based upon science, not based upon...
Well, the thing is, he knows that science is a rhetorically powerful thing, right?
Right.
People know that science works at a fundamental level because of just the world we live in, right? Like, we live in a world where we can... we can be on different ends of a continent right now, and we're all chatting in mostly real time with people watching who were themselves possibly from other continents watching.
Yep.
And that wouldn't be the case if science didn't work. So everyone, Christian or not, has this fundamental idea that, hey, science is a thing that works. It's how we get the lives that we live now. So if he can say, well, science supports my religious ideas, well, that's a really big boost to his religious ideas. And so he finds that valuable. Now, the disappointing part is that he puts a higher priority on his religious ideas being correct than he does on the science, which means he's willing to twist or ignore science that doesn't help and misrepresent science that he thinks he can make help, which means that he's essentially just dishonestly representing science and doing so because he knows the rhetorical value that science has to Christians as well as everyone else.
He's trying to have his cake and eat it too, right? He doesn't want to lose out on the benefits that he gets from science day to day, or like in just general society and in the general spectrum of the current world we live in, but needs to also undermine the science that goes against what he already believes. And so because he has to do that, he needs to separate the two out, so that way he can have one and eat the other.
You've got 2,000 years from Abraham to Christ, 2,000 years from Christ to the present 2,000 years. That's how we get 6,000 years. So that's where it comes from, just so you know. Now, a lot of people say, now, by the way, the Earth's age is 4.5 billion years old, and we have radioactive decay dating methods that found that. But you see, we certainly observe radioactive decay, whether it's rubidium, strontium, whether it's uranium, lead, potassium, argon. But when you're talking about the past, we have a problem. I'll give you a practical example. In Australia, there were engineers that were trying to search out about a coal mine, and so they drilled down and they found a basalt layer, lava flow, that had woody material in it, branches and twigs and so on. And when Dr. Andrew Snelling, our PhD geologist, sent that to a lab in Massachusetts
drink for
in
Snelling!
1994,
We'll talk about Snelling in a bit.
We drink for Snelling. I'm throwing that in right now.
All right.
We drink for this.
After he tells his story, I'll go over a little bit why Snelling is a drink-worthy individual.
Yep.
Okay.
It's basically a curse word at this point.
Potassium argon dating, it dated to 45 million years old. Well, he also sent the wood to the radiocarbon section of the same lab, and that dated to 45,000 years old. 45,000-year-old wood and 45 million-year-old rock. The point is, there's a problem.
Okay, hold on.
Let me give you another example of a problem.
Yeah.
So, let's say you had a gram scale that went up to 50 grams, right? This is for like measuring out like a kitchen scale, right? And then you put your entire like 2 kilogram bag of rice on the scale. What's the scale going to read? And we'll say it's a mechanical scale that goes up to 50 grams.
Mechanical scale, it's going to grade 50 grams.
Okay, does that mean that your bag of rice weighs?
Well, it's going to
50
read.
grams?
It's going to read. I'm sorry. It's going to read 50 grams because the weight exceeds the measuring thing. So at 50. Plus, right.
So
it'll be the
guess
ounce.
what? At about 45,000 years, you're at the maximum range of carbon dating. So what Andrew Snelling did was he found 45 million year old, probably petrified wood that probably didn't have any original carbon-14 or even carbon-12 in it, sent it to a lab and said, hey, what does this read in terms of carbon dating? And they came back and they were basically like, it's pegged high. And he was like, see, how could this be 100 times less old than the lava? That doesn't make any sense. No, dude. You put a 5 kilogram bag of rice on your 50 gram scale and then said, see, this bag of rice must only weigh 50 grams.
And that's the thing is that part of the thing is back to the thing about the science stuff. They probably said this range plus or minus blah, blah, blah with qualifiers, right? And it's not just an error bar; it's a fact of a lack of reliable data. And if you do carbon-14 samples in something which is not biologic, right? If you do a carbon-14 dating of a carbon-contrite meteorite that came from outer space, you're not going to get the date of the meteorite because carbon-14.
I'm sorry. It sounds to me, Landon, like you're describing to me the concept of context.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just want to be sure.
And understanding a measurement, right? Because we can't use parallax measurements to see the distance of quasars because they're too far, right? It makes it just much a lack of sense to try to use parallax to measure distance quasars by the shift once every 6 months, as it is to take carbon-14 dating of something which is well beyond the half-life of many half-lives of carbon-14, where you get essentially a nonsensical result.
By the way, Zach Hancock, use that in good health. Please use that analogy all over the place.
It is a good analogy.
Thank you. Now, I want to point out this is not the first time that, or the only time, that both Andrew Snelling and other creationists have been doing some suspicious business when it comes to paleontology and geology. So, for instance, Steve Austin, another creationist, not the $6 Million Man or the wrestler, different Steve Austin, he sent a number of samples to be radiometrically dated, and I don't remember exactly what technique it was using. It wasn't carbon-14, because, I mean, these were definitely just rock samples of igneous rock. But he got discordant dates. But one of the things that was pointed out to him was, hey, all these rocks are less old than the maximum dating range of the techniques you're using, except for one. So all these dates are just the same thing as like the 50 grams scale for your kitchen, right? That's just reading 50 grams, even though you put a 5 kilogram weight on it. But the one that did actually get a reasonable date had noticeable intrusions in it that could explain the reasonable date. And he was just like, nah, that's not, I checked, it's fine. And that was his entire response. Yeah.
Checked, it's fine.
Now I'm giving a vastly simplified overview of what
bro.
happened, but yeah. Andrew Snelling also, now you got to remember, AIG thinks that the flood rocks stop at the KPG boundary. So at the end of the Cretaceous, according to AIG, that's where the flood is done doing its rock deposition. So all of the Cenozoic, so like the Paleogene and the Miocene and the Holocene, all that stuff is post-flood. Well, Andrew Snelling has, on more than one occasion, gotten up in front of audiences to describe how we need the flood to have exquisitely preserved fossils, and then gone on to show Cenozoic or post-flood fossils in support of his idea that you need to have a flood, a global catastrophic flood, to preserve these.
The only term I can think of to describe Andrew Snelling is unga bunga.
Yeah. It's exactly like saying, oh, hey, only the only thing that could possibly erect this building is camels. Except that when you go and look at him building the building, he's using tractors. It's like, come on, dude, you're just lying to me, and I can see that you're doing it.
Yeah.
And when I say he's showing these fossils, I know how he got the fossil pictures, because almost all of them are on the first page of Google image results when you just search broad common taxa name like wasp, and then you type fossil. Right? Like, he showed us like the second wasp fossil from Google Images in his talk. And so I check and I say, okay, where's this wasp from? Oh, the Green River Formation. Oh, that's a Cenozoic formation with low energy deposition, not, say, a Paleozoic or a Mesozoic formation with high energy deposition like you might expect from his own flood model. So anytime Andrew Snelling does anything, you can basically assume he's lying, and I'll give one last example. He wrote a paper about the lack of stress fracturing in folded sediments in sedimentary rock. In this, he included a picture of folded strata to demonstrate that there were no large-scale stress fractures. But there were a number of humans in the picture in front of the rock strata, which is a little weird. Like, why are you taking a picture of like your students or field hands or whatever these people are when you're trying to take a picture of this rock strata? Well, it turns out that if you look at the same formation of rock from USGS, that's the United States Geological Survey pictures, all of those people are standing in front of the large-scale stress fractures that Andrew Snelling wrote a paper saying don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
He posed people in front of the stress fractures so that he could lie to you about them not being there.
Yeah. So when you're using the word lying, you have good evidence that he knew what he was saying was not. But I think I believe Snelling is one of those people that believes in what's called a noble lie, which is
that might be.
If I'm lying for a good cause, my lie is okay because the cause is good. And this is back to this presuppositionalist. This model of creation is correct, so we will lie in order to preserve what they think is
Yeah, I'm sure he thinks that he's doing the right thing, but he also knows that what he's saying in certain circumstances is not true.
If I know
There's no
anything,
way that... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If I know anything about Dapper, it's that Dapper is very tentative and very gracious when it comes to whoever he's debunking, and tends to focus very, very heavily on the things that they're saying and not who they are and what they're like, why they're saying what they're saying. There are very few exceptions, and that's usually when there has been an ample amount of dishonest bullshit. So, like your Kent Hovind, like your Andrew Snelling.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of like, you can't not know this. And to some extent, it's a lot of times it has to do with like people's degrees, right? So, like, if I say John Sanford is lying about Moto Kimura's work, it's because I know he's smart enough to know what Moto Kimura's work says, because I'm smart enough, and I'm not a PhD in genetics. Mm-hmm. So I know he knows that he's lying about it. Similarly, when Snelling intentionally poses people in places where if they were anywhere else, it would flatly debunk the entire point of the paper he's publishing this picture in.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing.
And using
and I mean, yeah, Zach says maybe they were just standing in front of it the whole time and he just never saw them. Yeah, maybe.
and for those watching that haven't subscribed to Dapper's channel, subscribe it or even look at it, because you'll find him having lots of videos about this kind of
Links
thing.
Down below.
This is something you should check out. It's the reason why he has at least 10,000 followers, because not only does he sort of point out some of the hypocrisy, but also educates people on the other side. So you learn and laugh at the same time.
I tried to waterfall Dapper's rant about Snelling, and I ran out of beer. So handle that however you guys see fit. But I did add one.
Well, at least you weren't doing the Jilly Juice style waterfalling.
Oh no!
There's a blast from the past. Haven't thought about that in a while, have you?
Oh, you know what? It actually just recently came up in the Discord.
Oh no!
Oh no!
There was a lava dome that started to form in the 80s after Mount St. Helens erupted. And in 1994, Dr. Steve Austin, another PhD geologist, actually sampled.
Oh, there he is, Steve Austin. Just talking about this.
He took whole rock, crushed it, sent it to the same lab, actually, I believe, and got a date of 0.35 million years when he separated out the minerals, amphibole and pyroxene, and used potassium iodide.
Let's pause and I'll talk about this. So I just misspeak a little bit. It was sort of the opposite problem, where instead of starting with a 50-gram scale and putting 5 kilograms on it, he's basically, this is more analogous to, like, those weigh-in stations for trucks that you see on the highway?
Yeah.
Yes.
He was trying to weigh his kitchen ingredients on one of those.
Yeah, like taking an envelope that needs stamped on it, put it in a truck scale, and say how many stamps I need to put on it, and the answer says 0. What envelope?
I tried to measure the amount of cayenne pepper I needed for my individual person meal, which was half of a tablespoon, and I decided to weigh it on my kitchen scale. Yeah, the one that the bathroom one that you stand on.
Yeah, the bathrooms. Yeah. So what happened here is basically the lab that he sent this to said that they could not date rocks below about 2 million years old reliably with the technique of argon-40 dating, right? Well, if you look, what that means is that 2 of these, the whole rock and the amphibole, come back as just 0, right? This is within the range that lab has told you we cannot distinguish less than this from 0. So 2 of the samples are within 0. So what's up with the pyroxene concentrate? Why is it above that threshold? Well, when people examined his pictures in his own paper of the samples he sent off that received the 2.8 million years, they had xenocrysts visibly evident. Now, what xenocrysts are rocks that have a higher melting point than the lava pool that they're in, so they don't melt, which means their radiometric clocks do not get reset, which means they are older. So if they're included in the sample and they're also pulverized with that sample and then sent to the mass spectrometer for study, that old crystal will yield a higher age reading than the rock would have without it. And again, when Snelling was called on this, he just said, nah, it's not xenocrysts.
Oh.
Like, nah. Oh, okay. I mean, that perfectly explains your results. And it also is evident in your own photographs. But okay, sure, maybe it's not xenocrysts.
I'm drinking for too stupid.
Yeah. And yeah, this is the exact same thing that I was talking about, where like both Andrew Snelling and Steve Austin are both knowingly doing things that the scale they're using can't do. And then when it doesn't do it, right. And when the scale doesn't work for the thing it was never designed to work for in the first place, then they're going, "Ha! See, this kitchen scale can't reliably measure my semi truck." Yep, that's true.
It's like using like a one of those spinny potato peelers or like an apple peeler that's like the motorized ones, and then using it to try and like shred cheese. That's like it's just like, why doesn't this work? I don't know. Clearly because like the machine is broken, right? Not because a user error.
and one of the things I want to point out is that the lab that Austin used is a lab that's in Massachusetts. It's still operating, but it no longer does these tests. And they were very upfront. When you sent samples to them, they had like, oh, you want to test with us? It costs a lot of money, so here's our warnings and like cautions. Right. And one of the things that they sent was, if you want argon-40 testing on rock samples, we cannot test samples that are expected to be lower than 2 million years old, because our machines are physically incapable of returning reliable results under 2 million years. So Austin did it anyway. So it's not like he can just feign ignorance. He got that paperwork, because otherwise, I mean, I guess you could have gotten the paperwork and then just signed it not caring. But like, that was put in front of his eyes as a scientist to say, hey, we can't do this test. He just went with it anyway.
Because he's a dishonest fuckhead, and I'm aggressive, so I have no problem saying that, even though the other two people here are way nicer than I am, publicly facing. I know what you guys say in the background.
Argon dating, you get 0.9 million, 2.8 million. My point is, all these dating methods actually give all sorts of different dates. In fact, different dating methods on the same rock, we can give all sorts of different dates. See, there's lots of assumptions in regard to
radiation. All right, pause it again.
For instance, the amounts of the...
Yep.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so...
187 drinks.
So, first of all, the vast majority of rocks that are tested with more than one radiometric dating technique all return dates that are within their mutual error bars, which basically means all the dates agree.
And this is exactly what Landon was saying, when it's very important to say that there are error bars on either side of whatever definitive number you're talking about. So as long as they fall within this margin of error bar, they're coming from the same.
Because if one technique says, oh, this is 50 million years plus or minus 5 million years, and another one says this is 53 million years plus or minus 2 million years, those are concordant dates, right? Because there are
before you move on, I just want to say thank you very much to Michael King for the £5 sticker. It's a keep it up thing. Doing a workout.
Oh, nice.
Sorry, go ahead, Dapper.
So, because those are there's a whole lot of overlap between those two error bars, those are considered a concordant date, because there's a lot of dates within that range that they both agree with. Right. Now, when they don't, that's when you start checking for things like contamination or various other processes, like maybe some kind of metamorphosis, that might have caused either parent elements to enter the rock or daughter elements to be able to leave. And you can check for these things, right? You can check for processes that would cause leaching in or out of parent or daughter isotopes.
Very important.
And so so it's not like we just test rocks and they routinely do not have concordant dates. And when they don't have concordant dates, we can usually figure out why, and that becomes a limit on that dating technique. So if you notice, hey, I'll use carbon dating because I happen to know some of the obvious limits that can come up that people already know about. So for instance, marine animals are usually not subjected to carbon dating because the carbon in the ocean tends to be older than the carbon on land, because it's gone through a longer cycle to get into the sort of circulation among the biosphere.
It's because of that flood thing.
Well, yeah, that doesn't really explain it. But anyway, there's a carbon reservoir. Now, it's also known that roadside organic remains also have an old carbon problem because they get a lot of their carbon from car exhaust, which is burning from fossil fuels that are already millions of years old. So they also date anomalously old. So when you know these things, you say, okay, well, we won't date those kinds of things with this technique. Similarly, if you notice that a certain kind of metamorphic rock always gives you like a weird age for like, I don't know, argon dating. Well, okay, you note that down and you don't use argon on that rock anymore because it's going to give you a discordant date. Similarly, like I talked about earlier with the xenocrysts, we know you should avoid xenocrysts in your dating of igneous rocks because we know they'll give you an anomalously old age. So if you get an anomalously old age, check, hey, did my original rock have a bunch of xenocrysts? If it did, be more careful next time you select a sample from it to not include those. And so what Ken Ham is just doing is saying, well, sometimes we get unexpected results that don't immediately make sense. So I guess all of the science behind radiometric dating is wrong. That's not how measurements work.
Yeah, that's not...
Because it's... But again, and to summarize in terms of radiometric dating, don't put envelopes on a roadside truck scale to determine your postage. Don't put trucks on your kitchen postal scale in order to weigh the truck, right? Use the appropriate thing. And if you get a result which is anomalous, then look into what might have happened, because you can get equipment that malfunctions. You can get an assumption, a material assumption that turns out to be indeed challenging. So you need to be careful and not simply, it's not just a matter of you stick a thermometer in your quiche and say, oh, it's done, right? You need to be able to understand the concepts, understand the scales, understand the applicability, and also then investigate when you get anomalies as to what went wrong.
Right. We did get a member for 19 months. Thank you so much, Command Cyborg. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. It says, you see, Trigglypuff AIG are a bag of aubergine? I got it right.
Yes.
Aubergine. I don't know, what is that? I assume it's that Bag of Dicks.
Eggplant.
Oh, it's an eggplant. Yeah,
those are eggplants.
Oh, I didn't know that's what I've learned something today, and also I get to drink about it. So this is all.
And isn't the notion of eggplant a North American thing? And for example, you go to Australia, you get they call it.
Yeah, most English speakers outside of North America call aubergine. Well, I mean, yeah, that's
so. Most of the world understands it as not as eggplant, because you think about it, an eggplant doesn't really seem to be. I mean, why would you call it an eggplant? I don't know any eggs that look like that. So
they are actually egg-shaped very strongly when they are first going from flower to becoming a fruit that's then going to later grow. So right initially after the flower is fertilized and it closes up, it grows a very egg-shaped bulb.
Oh, so it's not just about the fruit that it produces, it's about the entirety of the plant.
Right. Well, the bulb itself, that's part of the fruit that's going to grow into the adult eggplant thing that you're, or the ripe eggplant thing that you're going to eat. But when it's first fertilized, the first stages of it being the fruit, it is a very small, very egg-shaped little.
I do want to point out that I do appreciate the use of the Trigglypuff. That is the first time I've seen it used this way, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated. But also, like, I feel like there's something, is the eggplant the eggplant emoji and, like, eggplant in general being a euphemism for, like, penis? Is that around the world? Is that a global thing, or is that just, like, localized?
Pretty much. I mean, I saw it. I saw it being done in Indonesia.
Oh.
Because you're not allowed. Yeah. So I don't know if they would ever put an emoji out that was actually a real penis.
Oh, no,
so they'd have to have all the shades and all the other things. So where I think we're stuck with eggplant. And it's sad because if you want to say, when I'm talking about describing a flavor, tastes like sauteed eggplant, you have to not put the emoji because it gets misconstrued.
Okay.
Because I don't want to risk when I'm talking about flavor profile to say, you mean your flavor profile is an ARG bag? Is that what you're saying?
I am so okay. My brain immediately went to like Japan miss me with all that tentacle porn. Where's my eggplant porn? And then Smitty in the chat is like, I've seen the eggplant in Japanese hentai, and it's like, no. Son of a bitch.
If it exists, there's porn of it.
If it exists, there's porn of it. Yeah, you're right.
That's
you're right.
the rule.
It is the rule.
When the rock formed, you have to know them, but you weren't there. See, that's historical science. Assumption 2, that all daughter atoms measured today must have only been derived in situ.
Historical science is actually, I mean, again, why does they call it? Because isn't historical science a history of science?
I will literally die on this hill just because it's funny to tease Dapper about it. As far as I'm concerned, science and history are the same thing.
That's not true.
No, it is.
History is a different kind of.
So you're saying that Ken Ham is right?
pursuit.
You're saying that he's right?
Science is science, and what he calls.
Go ahead.
Science is science, and what he calls historical science is just science, and it is not history. And history is history, and it has a different kind of evidence that it uses. It is not... Now, empirical data can preclude historical conclusions, but historical conclusions are not primarily based on strictly empirical data. Rather, they are based on things like textual data.
I have this whole other conversation that I want to present at some point in time. Not tonight, just because I think it's like we need to get through some of this. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I will say that I have this whole presentation that is essentially everything is actually everything, and we just have these really loose guidelines to make our understanding better. And so it's like, art is science, science is art, art is physics, physics is math, math is science, science is history. Like, it's all, like, all of it is it's all the same thing.
And if I give you a shout out for a YouTuber,
no, shut up, Landon. I'm gonna mute you.
Kathy loves physics and history, and go to her channel. Kathy loves physics and history.
Is Kathy spelled with a C or a K?
Kathy loves physics and history, and she has a series called The Lightning Tamers: A History of Electricity. And that's important because, you know, people if you say electricity, you might say Ohm's law and so forth, but do you realize that there was a controversy about Ohm's law and how that came about and who Michael Faraday was and who Westinghouse was and the development of AC and so forth? She does a really good stuff because she's not afraid to show you equations, or she'll give you a trigger warning. But on the other hand, you learn about how, you know, things like electricity, modern electricity stuff was developed.
There's nothing that amuses me more than hearing about the drama in like controversies and like petty arguing that happens in like every like different field and like between people. It's so fun. Like, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Engineering, patents, intellectual property, models, sort of thing.
Everywhere.
There's a lot of things. But yes, Kathy loves physics and history. Right person. Competent scientist,
Landon seal of approval.
Really good historian. So check it out.
Dapper. You know, we have the citation needed. We need like a Landon seal of approval, and like a Dapper seal of approval, and like a Manya seal of approval. We need like a bunch of seals for everybody.
Would be fun.
That would be fun.
Radioactive decay of parent atoms. In other words, it's a closed system, but you don't know that, and there's a lot of evidence that that's not so.
Okay, hold on.
Number 3, that the decay rates of...
We can know if it's a closed system because we can check for contamination in various ways. Now, can we ever know for certain? No, but that's not what science is about. So yes, we can check to see if it was a closed system.
I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure I'm preemptively drinking. Like before I hit the play button, I just took, as I was hitting it, I took a drink knowing whatever he said was going to be wrong.
Remained a constant. And they're just some of them. There's others as well. The point is there's lots of assumptions in regard to the dating methods.
Okay, so...
Told you this is when the drinking game started.
Yeah. The quote-unquote assumption that spontaneous radioactive decay rates stayed the same is just the assumption that physics didn't change for no reason in the past. That's the assumption of science. That's one of the basic assumptions of just the entire scientific endeavor. So if Ken Ham wants to make other assumptions than those of science, he's welcome to. But what he's not welcome to do is to then pretend that what he's doing is science. You need to do science according to the things that science does, one of which is to say that physics does not change how it operates temporally or in terms of physical location. If you go to the other side of the universe, physics is physics. If you go back 3 billion years, physics is physics. If you go forward 3 billion years, physics is physics.
There's a handful of like slight nuance in like gravity will fluctuate depending on where you go. So, and the reason I say this is specifically because I think when the like Ken Ham's audience hears physics, they think gravity. Like
But
when they
what won't
hear
vary-
these terms. Sorry, go ahead.
What won't vary though is the gravitational constant.
Right. And so,
Yes.
like, isn't that until, like, and Landon, can you correct me if I'm wrong here? Sorry, I shouldn't say correct me if I'm wrong. I'm asking a question. Does that apply within, like, the horizons of a black hole, or does that start to get weird as well?
I mean, the part of the problem is that more extreme conditions, simplified approximation models begin to break down. Oftentimes,
Right.
in science, you're trying to transform your environment into an extreme environment, and some of those transforms work on assumptions
carry the one.
that become no longer work. Much like
Right.
the truck scale on your with a letter, or the truck on your postal mail scale. You got to work within the confines of things. So sometimes there's these approximations we do,
Right.
which don't work at the extreme. Not that to say that the thing is wrong, but it's
Right.
hard to measure and make predictions in some of the extreme conditions.
What I mean to say is that with the type of people we're dealing with when you're dealing with AIG, whom we all are well aware are a bag of dicks, in fact, that you're going to try, what you're going to find is you're going to find eventually that they're going to start shifting the goalposts. And to do that, they're going to say, well, but this doesn't apply in this scenario. So if it doesn't apply in this scenario, how do you know it applies in that scenario, which is the same scenario that we're already applying it to, that it does function?
Sure. And so this notion of historical science is somehow, you weren't there.
Right.
Again, I think in an earlier session,
You weren't there.
I came back to Ken Ham and said, you weren't there with Noah. You
Right.
weren't there with when the canon was collected. You weren't there when it was translated, blah, blah, blah. So Ken Ham, you're doing historical theology.
I mean, yeah, that would be a way to put it.
It is, and this is something I think that Ken Ham allowed to get away with, because Bill Nye was almost like, it seems like when he does his responses, he already had his response in hand and didn't respond to what Ken was saying. I would be hammering Ken Ham on what he said. I would also come back and say, and you didn't address this. You ignored this point because it's inconvenient for your theology.
Alicia, who's been a member for 21 months, thank you so much, Alicia, greatly appreciated. AIG, very creatively spelled out with the emojis, is indeed a bag of dicks.
Nice.
I'll take a drink for a bag of dicks.
Very good, Alicia. And it is a shame that there isn't a G thing around. There should be.
It's surprising there isn't.
So there's no dating method you can use that you can absolutely age date a rock. There's all sorts of differences out there. And I do want to address the bit you brought up about Christians believing in millions of years. Yeah, there's a lot of Christians out there that believe in millions of years, but I'd say they have a problem. I'm not saying they're not Christians, but
yes, you are.
Salvation is conditioned upon faith in Christ, not the age of the earth. But there's an inconsistency with what the Bible teaches. If you believe, then
why do you go on and on about the age
of
the earth? Why don't you just go with your faith and go forward? Why, Ken Ham, do you propagate your whole current adult life and stick around the age of the earth when you claim that Christianity is about faith in Christ? Why don't you just stick to the faith, as opposed to worshiping science and discarding the science you don't like because it doesn't give you the answer you want, and then cherry picking what you have.
Made millions on this.
He did make a lot of money.
Millions of dollars poured in for him to build his boat-shaped building with a building-shaped building in the back with modern industrial-scale HVAC inside, because otherwise it would be a death trap.
Money.
But if that is the case, that would make him a stoinking schmuck.
I mean,
Yeah. It's Ken Ham.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what stoinking schmuck is, look it up. You'll find it.
Turn safe search on.
I don't know. It's a variation. It's not quite proper Yiddish, but it is people who use Yiddish in an interesting way from Bavarian German.
And bloodshed, suffering, disease, over millions of years leading to man, because that's what you see in the fossil record. The Bible makes it very clear death is a result of man's sin. In fact, the first death was in the garden when God killed an animal, clothed Adam and Eve, first blood sacrifice pointing towards what would happen with Jesus Christ, who would be the one who would be die once and for all. Now, if you believe in millions of years as a Christian...
Wait a minute. A die once and for all? The guy who came back to life? What?
Yeah, the idea is then that lets everyone else come back from the dead.
Oh. Alright, I'll leave that one alone. I feel like there's a rabbit hole there, but I'm just gonna, acknowledge that there's a rabbit hole there, but...
Yeah, we could make the rest of the stream about Christian soteriology if you want.
Let's not do that.
In the fossil record, there's evidence of animals eating each other. The Bible says originally all the animals and man were vegetarian. We weren't told we could eat meat until after the flood. There's diseases represented in the fossil record. Were the bacteria
and so forth vegetarian as well? Did they?
See, you don't count as dying. Well, so yeah, that's a good question of whether or not they ate meat, because I guess there wouldn't be meat available. But importantly, death doesn't count if you don't have a nose.
Oh. What?
Yeah, that's a thing for Ken Ham.
So is that
animals that don't have a nose doesn't count as they can't die. Same thing with plants.
So is that
they don't have the breath of life? They don't have the breath of life. Is that the deal?
Specifically in their nostrils. You have to have the breath of life in nostrils, or you're not technically alive, according to Ken Ham, which means that when you die, it doesn't count.
Does that mean when you hold your breath,
I'm sorry,
you're not alive when you hold your breath?
No, because you're going to need to breathe again. But if breathing through a nostril isn't something you need to do, then according to Ken Ham, you're not alive, and so when you die, it doesn't count as death for these purposes.
So bacteria not having nostrils can't be alive.
Right.
Although there's a controversy whether they're alive or not, but
well, I mean that would you don't even have to go that
algae
far.
Not having a nose is not alive.
Any
a tree
plant
not having a nose isn't alive.
Insects, mollusks. So according to Ken Ham, squid don't count as alive in the sense that you couldn't kill them before the flood or the fall or whatever, because they don't have nostrils, in which is the breath of life.
I'm sorry,
Trees
my brain
don't have
is.
nostrils. Are they alive?
Yep, and that's according to Ken Ham, they would not be alive in the sense that they couldn't die before the fall, because not having nostrils in which the breath of life is there, not technically alive in the fullest sense. Now, he doesn't actually explicitly state that about squid, but the problem is it's the logical entailment of his belief about the breath of life.
No.
Applying the Aaron Ra factor, a rock not having a breath of life means it's not alive, and it's not an atheist, or it's an atheist.
That would be one that would apply, yes.
But I suppose that would be a non-living atheist.
Trees, some insects, a lot of stuff that lives in the ocean, are just not alive.
All right, I had to make that joke.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm just gonna.
So,
I'm adding another drink for how stupid that is. I'm sorry. I need to.
At some point, if you see this thing, you can tell us where in the crowd you were. I was kind of curious whether or not, we with the shots where we see you or not.
We haven't seen him in the crowd shots. If you watch the other part of this video that came out, so there was the debate part, and then they did a tour of the museum with Ken Ham and Bill Nye talking, Aaron is just like hovering around kind of behind, just being intimidating.
Yeah, he looks like he's kind of stalking them. It's kind of funny.
A little bit. It's really great.
But in person, Aaron's like, he's a nice guy. He's actually
he
quite,
seems
quite
absolutely lovely. I would love to go get a beer with him someday, but that's never gonna happen.
Yeah. And I am, by the way, I am a patron. Just for disclaimer, I'm a patron of Aaron as well.
You shilling Aaron shit on my channel? What the fuck?
Sorry, trademark Canada.
It's fine. It's teasing.
But the Bible says when God made everything, it was very good. God doesn't call brain tumors very good. There's fossilized thorns in the fossil record,
jump to
hundreds of
brain
millions
tumors.
of years old. The Bible says thorns came after the curse. So these two things can't be true at the same time. And you know what? There's hundreds of dating methods out there, hundreds of them. Actually, 90% of them contradict billions of years.
Okay,
and
hold
the
on.
point
Let's go
is,
through
all
some of
such
these.
dating methods.
Wait. You know,
So most of
guess
these.
what? There are hundreds of different types of scales where we can measure individual nucleons to large ships in an ocean, right? There's a whole scale of stuff. It doesn't mean that they're all wrong. It just means these are various important techniques.
I made them bigger so we could see them easier.
All right. So one of the problems with all of these is that basically most of them are not actually ways to date the age of the Earth.
One of them
Because
just says
most of
meteor
them-
dust.
Yeah, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean.
That
But
would
like,
be a
if you
thing
look
that
at
you would
things like
measure.
coral reef growth.
Interstellar
For
gas
coral reef-
expansion is not, or
Yeah.
a rotation of spiral galaxies. That's not a.
Right. So many of these are in like the coral reef growth thing, where you have to assume that all coral reefs started growing at the beginning of the formation of Earth and have been growing continually since then. No one thinks that.
I have a question.
Human civilizations are the same. Does anyone think that human civilization started with the start of the Earth? No, no one thinks that.
I have a question that's important for the game that we're playing. Do we have to drink for every one of these?
No.
I think it's a general thing there, but it is a thing about, I'm looking at some of this stuff here. Like, for example, the lifetime of a meteor shower, Earth's magnetic field. So I think these are things that probably Ken Ham says has to do with age, and they're different, and I don't like them, right? But meteor dust, by the way, it'll be meteorite dust, because meteor dust would be in the atmosphere as something that's vaporized. I think he's probably about meteorite dust.
That counts as wrong.
I know that you have meteorites, meteoroids, and
Meteorons.
meteor, right? So meteor is the thing going through the atmosphere. When it lands, it becomes a meteorite, and if it's out in space, it's a meteoroid.
Okay.
And meteor is also asteroid. Asteroid's a big thing. So he's talking about small rocks. Dust or small rocks up in the atmosphere.
No. I know what I bet you I know what he's talking about. Okay, hear me out on half of these. Half of these are things that are being measured, not measurements, not like ways of measuring. Right? Meteor dust isn't talking about the meteor that you find on Earth. It's talking about the layer of dust on the moon. Like, I guarantee you that's what it's talking about. So, like, sediment in the sea isn't a measurement of time, but you can measure the amount of sediment in the sea using, like, a ruler. So, like, what he's talking about is these are not what he's presenting them as. They're not different types of measurements. They are different things that can be measured.
And I think, if I were responding back, have a response, I would also, I think it's important at this point to treat Ken Ham with a bit of contempt. I would say, by the way, Ken Ham, in response, it's meteorite dust, not meteor dust. If you're going to talk about science, at least bother to get it right. Because Ken Ham tries to say, well, I'm a true scientist because I don't do this historical science, and It's like, no, your faith in science is causing you to have to do conniptions to try to reconcile it with your faith in the Bible. So
TD Lane makes
Over.
a good point and says, can we just call this giant list a Gish Gallop? And I think kind of yes, but also I think you can write it off as just a misrepresentation of what it's even showing in the first place.
Yeah, so a lot of these, like you look at, like, say, Niagara Falls, Stone Age burials, coral reef growths, like I already mentioned. A lot of these are sort of the analogy of, like, the analogy that I use is like, okay, if you notice that you had developed, like, a pimple a week ago, you can date how old the pimple is, but that doesn't tell you how old you are.
Right. Yeah,
if you can date how old a coral reef is, that doesn't tell you anything about how old the planet is, unless you have good reason to think that the coral reef is primordial. Same thing with Niagara Falls. No one in science is saying that Niagara Falls started when Earth started.
But Dapper, on your show, I remember you're talking about toilets in an age of a house.
Yeah, that was another thing. I don't remember which creationist it was. I think it was Kent Tovin, who said you can tell how old a house is by checking the date on the toilet. Only if you can guarantee that the house has never gotten a new toilet. If it has, then no, you can't.
There's nothing like Kent Hovind talking about toilets. That's just appropriate. Like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's basically a toilet person.
I'm sorry, is he a plumber? What the does he know about toilets? Does he work in porcelain? Is he part of the big porcelain industry? I'm in play.
It's fallible, and I claim there's only one infallible dating method. It's a witness who was there, who knows everything, who told us, and that's from the Word of God. And that's why I would say...
So Ken Ham, since you weren't a witness to the creation, we can then dismiss your 6,000 year stuff because you're not a witness, right? You say, well, there's the Bible. Well, how do you know the Bible is correct, right? You have to go, you have to do this historical theology.
He'd have a better leg to stand on if God just in the Bible, like if somebody in the Bible wrote out, and God said 6,000 years ago that blah, 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 blah. He'd have like a better chance. It still wouldn't be great, but it'd be better than what he's got.
6,000 years, and as Dr. Faulkner said, there's nothing in astronomy, and certainly Dr. Snelling would say there's nothing in geology to contradict a belief in a young age for the Earth and the universe.
Thank you, Mr. Ham. Mr. Nye, your 5-minute rebuttal, please.
All right, do we want to do another 5 minutes of Bill Nye, or are we going to call it there? We are at the 2 hour and 30 minute mark. We could take a break.
I mean, I'm okay with... I think we should at the least take a break. I'm okay with calling if you want to. I'm also okay with going for a bit more if you want to.
Let's take a break.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We will be back, and we're going to, go refill our drinks. You go get yours. I got to put another one in the fridge, apparently. And we'll be back. We'll do another 5 minutes of Bill Nye, and that's when we'll probably call it, because I feel like it usually takes us a little less time to go through Bill Nye than it does to go through Ken Ham.
Oh, yeah.
We will be back momentarily. Oh, hello. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody's back with us because
Hello.
my setup is not nearly as good as Dapper's. So I don't have like background talk for us. We're just guessing. Thank you so much for joining us. I greatly appreciate you being here. Thank you so much if you've been super chatting, if you've been liking, if you've been sharing, if you're leaving comments and you're participating in chat, or if you're just lurking. I just greatly appreciate that you're here and being supportive so far. Thank you so much. Landon, what you eating?
So I am eating Red Rock Deli, sweet and chili sour cream potato chips from Australia, allegedly. Thank you very much, Red Eye, allegedly. They're it's not never seen an advertisement, but North American potato chips tend to be salt laden things that don't have much of a flavor. Unfortunately, these things tend to be baked. So Australian based things. I think Australia really knows how to do chips, and they're lovely. So
I really like kettle chips.
And thank you, Red Eye.
Kettle chips are one of my favorites. There's one. So for anybody who doesn't know, my name is my real life name is actually Victoria, and I got a bullying a bunch because there's a type of chip that is a kettle chip, known for its being super crunchy and like crispy. That's called Miss Vicky's, and so I got to listen about that. Got to hear about that a lot. Also, their chips are fantastic, and I absolutely love them.
Yeah.
Salt and vinegar, baby.
Do they have
so
ketchup
thank you
flavor?
again, Red Eye, for this. It's actually it's really good flavor.
Nice.
So.
What was that, Dapper?
Do they have ketchup flavored?
Oh, does
Actually they do have they do have they call it tomato sauce as well as the ketchup. But yes, they do have a really good ketchup flavored
I think they
Red Rock Deli. If you look at Red Rock Deli, they have a wide range of stuff.
Yeah, the Miss Vicky's ketchup flavor is called sweet and spicy ketchup. I've never tried them, but I assume that they're probably good. I like ketchup.
And for the record, Chesh doxed herself. So
kind of, yeah. So there was a doxing attempt made against me from Kiwi Farms forever ago, and I just mostly found it funny, and I was like, this is my name, and then a certain person went around giving out extra additional information about me to try to prove something, but that kind of didn't go anywhere, so I don't think there's too much point of getting into the details, because I don't want to actually end up putting out more information about myself than is necessary in that case. But yeah, I put out my first name. Yep.
And she's in Canada, and that's all you need to know.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, my first name's out there, my last name's out there, so like it's not terribly a big deal. But
and her
whatever.
mom is cool.
My mom is super cool. My mom is super cool.
Yes.
Agreed. Chesh mom is best.
Yes, Gabo mom. Shout out to Gabo mom. She was here earlier. I'm not sure if she's still here, but if you're still here, hi mom. My mom thinks my YouTube channel is cool.
Hi, Chesh's mom.
Thank you very much. Let me.
As far as I know, my mom's never watched my YouTube channel.
45 million year old rock on top of 45,000 year old trees. Maybe the rock slid on top. Maybe that's it. That seems much more reasonable explanation than it's impossible. As far
that's
as
a bad
dating
explanation, dude. Come on, man.
I feel like you could probably come up with a better analogy.
No, look, my explanation was perfectly fine.
Yes.
The carbon dating was already basically pegged high. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't believe
the
that was
truck
actually
smashed your postal scale and you're done. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that was way better. The amount of energy, like, okay, well, whatever. We're just gonna hit play. We're drinking for Bill Nye being wrong and picking a bad analogy, though.
Actually, the methods are very reliable. One of the mysteries or interesting things that people in my business, especially at the Planetary Society, are interested in is why all the asteroids seem to be so close to the same date.
I'm also gonna drink for AIG is a bag of dicks because YouTube just said, warning, heads up, we've detected a copyrighted audio and video in your stream. Your stream may be temporarily blocked.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, drink for AIG is a bag of dicks. Cheers!
And feel free in the chat to come up with various ways to say that without specifically saying it. We like to hear those things. And as I think about in Dapper's chat channel, they come up with some really interesting linguistic things. But by the way, Dapper, I really like some of the people doing the haikus.
Haikus are great.
Yes. Yeah.
That's really good.
There were limericks too.
Do you have one do you have one nearby that you can read to us?
No, I don't remember. I know that there were a few. I think there was at least one during the 10K special, and there's been a few previous to that.
Yes. All right.
It's in an age 4.5, 4.6 billion years. It's a remarkable thing. People at first expected a little more of a spread. So I understand that you take the Bible as written in English, translated not countless, but many, many times over the last 3 millennia, as to...
Oh dear.
You pick up a Bible, except for very, very few cases, the number of translations that text has gone through to get to the object in your hand is exactly one.
I mean, yeah.
It has been translated. 1-to-1. Yep. If you pick up a Bible in the English language, it has gone from the original language directly to English. It did not go through Latin or any other languages. And if you are in fact holding an example, then it will note exactly what it is a translation of. So, for instance, if you want an English translation of the Vulgate, which is the Latin translation of the Bible, you can get one. But it will tell you that it is a translation specifically of the Vulgate. Similarly, if you want an English translation of the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of what Christians call the Old Testament, you can get one, but it will tell you that it is an English translation, not of the Bible, or of the Tanakh, or of the Old Testament, but specifically of the Septuagint. So this right here is a big, I think, tactical blunder on Bill Nye's part, because he does not know anything about how ancient texts are translated or transmitted. And I think he knows less about this than most of Ken Ham's audience, who do know that the translations that they're reading are direct translations that do not have any extra translations in that step. Now, there are translation traditions, and there are obviously errors in various translations and biases of translators, but it is not accurate to say that it has taken numerous translations to get to you to where you are with your current English Bible. It has taken one.
I suppose he was trying to describe, again, I'm guessing, transcriptions where someone's verbal account turned to someone's written account, was turned into someone's... You think he's trying to do that sort of thing?
If he's trying to talk about the transmission of the text, then, it has been copied numerous times. That's not translating, that's the transmission of the text. And also, we have a large enough corpus of texts that we know what the major variants are, which ones are most likely the older readings, or in some cases the original readings. And we also know that most of the text does not have any significant variants. So, if you grab a hold of a Hebrew Bible or a Greek New Testament, what you're getting in that text is extremely close to what an original might have been. And where there is significant doubt, that will be noted in the textual apparatus. There will be footnotes, alternate readings, sources for alternate readings, why the main text went with what it went with. This is not something that's hard to investigate. You just have to do it. And most people don't, especially most people who aren't terribly interested in the Bible, which I get the feeling that Bill Nye isn't, which is fine. But don't then go and pretend that your r/atheism talking points about translations are a good critique. Because I guarantee you, almost everyone in this audience has heard it, and they know why it's dumb.
It's one of those things where it's kind of like a bad atheist trope, and you see a handful of these ones. There's really bad ones that are history. Atheist tropes are notoriously bad at when it comes to history, and I would probably even put this kind of under that heading, because it comes off as It's the atheist equivalent of saying the King James Bible is the most accurate Bible translation. It's the same kind of problem.
It falls into the same trope as like, oh, the Catholic Church taught that the Earth was flat. It literally never did that happen. Or like saying, oh, never mind. Go ahead.
We do have we have two super chats. We have one for Inkboy for 5 that says AIG is a Bag of Deeeks. And we have from Alicia Wingland that says, for 2, AIG es una bolsa de eggplant. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Forgive me, I'm the worst.
By the way, you want to talk about textual stuff? Check out the Milwaukee Atheist. Disclaimer: I'm a patron of theirs. They do a lot of stuff on, for example, reading the Bible, and they have people there that understand Hebrew, understand Greek. They've got things like Septuagint. They've got commentaries and so forth, and they're going through the Bible very, very carefully there and looking at things, variations, textual stuff, historical stuff. They do a lot of also special things regarding some of their again things around the Bible. So you will probably learn more about biblical text and biblical text history and commentary from these atheists than you will in any Sunday school.
If you do go over from here over to Milwaukee Atheist, first off, tell him I say hi. I haven't seen him in forever. And also tell him to swing by because I haven't seen him in forever. So,
I'll deliver the message too.
Oh my god, yes! Okay.
Be a more accurate, more reasonable assessment of the natural laws we see around us than what I and everybody in here can observe. That to me is unsettling, troubling. And then about the disease thing, are the fish sinners? Have they done something wrong to get diseases? That's sort of an extraordinary claim that takes me just a little past what I'm comfortable with. And but
stop. Bill, he had so many things regarding factual stuff that you could have picked on. And you trying to challenge his theological-based stuff on your understanding of theology, I think you're a little bit of a fish out of water. There's so many things that he said that you could either have said, Bill and I talked about this, species thing, and I gave you estimates of, and you don't have a response to it, or you talked about this false, measuring system when in fact, it's misleading. You could have done that, but no, you're trying to basically say, well, let me, a scientist, give you a little Bible study, right?
I understand the idea. So it kind of makes sense to present a side, and then pick on a side, and then pick on a side. So Bill Nye is trying to kind of attack the foundation rather than the individual points, which isn't inherently a bad idea, but you need to do it right, and you shouldn't do so when it detracts from the totality of the conversation, and if you're not good at it. And you can hear the way Bill Nye is presenting this, that he is not confident in what he is saying. And you can hear that by the amount that he's stuttering, by the amount that he's pausing, by the amount that he's reading far more than he was during his presentation, which tells me that he is either not well read in these areas, or this is just something that he is not nearly as confident in as he is when it comes to the actual science of the matter. So what you want to do in a debate, and this is specifically PR debate advice, lean into the things that you're strong in, and lean into the things that your opponent is weak against. We know that Ken Ham is weak against semantics, and because that is he uses semantics a lot to try and he puts a lot of weight on specific words. And you can kind of pick on that because he is making a semantic argument at that point, and semantic arguments are usually not the strongest of arguments. And we know that Ken Ham doesn't know the science, or we at least know that Ken Ham is going out of his way to either take the science that he wants to use and then manipulate the science that he can take care of and then throw everything else out. And so if you can kind of focus and narrow in on that instead of bringing up things that are entirely theological, you're going to make a better argument, unless Bill Nye here is specifically trying to play to the atheists at home. Like, unless he's, like, swinging for, like his own base and choir preaching at this point, if you're gonna do that, please do not encourage atheists in directions of, like, really bad, incorrect assumptions that a lot of atheists will make, and tropey nonsense. Like, do better. Savage Cobra for 5 said, AIG is a flagrantly fair use abusing formation of fallacious phalli. So drink for that one, Bag of Deeeks.
Very well done.
Nice.
Thank you. Thank you,
well done.
Savage.
I'm going to highlight
Well
that
done.
so it shows up at the bottom of the screen.
Regularly fair use abusing formation and fallacious phalli. Well done. I like that.
Dapper, you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, I think you covered it, so I don't think I have any new thoughts.
Thanks.
Can't observe the past. I have to stop you right there. That's what we do in astronomy. All we can do is in astronomy is look at the past. By the way, you're looking at the past right now.
This is true, we are.
The speed of light bounces off of me and then gets to your eyes. And I'm delighted to see that the people in the back of the room appear just that much younger than the people in the front.
Oh, a joke that landed.
This idea that you can separate the natural laws of the past from the natural laws that we have now, I think, is at the heart of our disagreement. I don't see how we're ever going to agree with that if you insist that natural laws have changed. It's, for lack of a better word, it's magical. And I have appreciated magic since I was a kid, but it's not really what we want in conventional mainstream science. So your assertion that all the animals were vegetarian.
Okay, before he goes into this, all the animals are vegetarian thing, I want to pick on this magic thing. Specifically because when he's referring to magic and the magic that he likes and the magic that he doesn't want in science, he's talking about, if he were Dapper, I would buy this. And the reason I would buy this is because Dapper would be making the analogy in the way, and tell me if I'm wrong, Dapper, of that Andrew Snelling is using optical illusions and tricks and, like, ways to fool the eye by putting people in front. He's doing, like, sleight of hand of science to make you think you're seeing something that you're not.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I do not think that's what Bill Nye is saying, and I think that if you are, specifically if you're an online atheist, because I see this a lot from online atheism, and I think it's a little problematic, when you invoke magic to equate to miracle, you're gonna miss your mark. Right?
I generally think that's true with a theistic audience, yeah.
So if you're talking to a theist and you say, like, well, what you're talking about is basically just magical, and they're gonna say, yeah, and? Like, that's the point? So, like, you're kind of just agreeing with them at that point. This isn't really... You're gonna miss your mark. So I would avoid this specific type of argumentation only because I don't think you're gonna get your point across as clearly. When what you're saying is what I would say if I was Bill Nye in this case is I would say that you're calling on the supernatural, and science focuses on natural laws, as I had described before, so I don't think it's appropriate for you, Ken Ham, to apply something that is supposed to be supernatural to... Like, I don't think you should be limiting your God nor your interpretation of the Bible to what science is even capable or even what science is focused on to begin with.
Nor your insecurity of your faith is appropriate then to try to distort science that you appear to worship, Mr. Ham, by and definitely trying to discard things that don't match your presuppositionalist notion of your faith. If you just said, I believe this is my faith, I say, well, that's fine. We wouldn't have this debate.
You're right, exactly.
Before they got on the ark. That's really remarkable. I have not spent a lot of time with lions, but I can tell they've got teeth that really aren't set up for broccoli. That these animals were vegetarians till this flood is something that I would ask you to provide a little more proof for. I give you the lion's teeth. You give me verses as translated into English over, 30 centuries? So that is not enough evidence for me. If you've ever played telephone, I remember very well in kindergarten, where you have a secret and you whisper it to the next person.
No. This is a really bad analogy and a really bad point. Specifically, given they just sheer number of accurate, and consistent oral traditions that exist throughout human history. So,
and not only that,
no.
The Bible is not primarily composed of oral history anyway. It's written down.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we're gonna get 2 drinks for that?
Yeah.
Please. Sorry, go ahead.
There's not that much controversy about the actual, letter-by-letter text of the Bible. There just isn't. Oh yeah,
there's
Michael
a
for 3 pounds.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, there are contested readings, and there are areas where it's not clear what the original reading is likely to be, but they are not the majority of the text. The majority of the text has a single reading, and in those areas where there are multiple readings, most of them are as simple as things like, how do you spell this word?
Yeah.
And in cases where it's not that simple, even then, there are only a handful of places where anyone has ever based any particular kind of doctrine or something off of those particular variations. And if you pick up a modern critical edition of even a translation of the Bible, it will tell you where those variants are, and the idea that the text of the Bible is the result of a 3,000-year-old telephone game is wildly inaccurate. Now, does our high degree of confidence over what the text of the Bible is on a letter-for-letter basis, does that translate into the Bible as a reliable historical record of the events it describes? No. If 2,000 years from now, you get a word-for-word, letter-for-letter copy of The Lord of the Rings, that tells you that you have what Tolkien wrote. It doesn't tell you there were really elves.
Very good point. Excellent point.
Yeah, no, that's 100% accurate. This is not a good point to make. I think it's not only rhetorically unsound, but I also think that it's going to work against you in this kind of discussion, particularly with an audience that deals with this.
Yeah, this is an audience who probably knows the basics of how the Bible was transmitted and got to them today.
Yeah.
The next person. Things often go wrong. So it's very reasonable to me that instead of lions being vegetarians on the ark, lions are lions, and the information that you use to create your worldview is not consistent with what I as a reasonable man would expect.
You just called the entire audience unreasonable. Okay, I don't think you're entirely wrong to do so, but if you're going to do that, you need to do it in the best way possible. This was not the best way possible. This is what I think we mean when we say Bill Nye is not a debater. His presentation was good, and we didn't really have that much issue with the majority of his presentation, right? But now we're in the part where he's trying to pick apart Ken Ham on the fly, kind of, but also, his use of, when it comes to debating and when it comes to, the way you're going to be perceived by the people you're talking to, you have just lost about 50% of the people in that room by saying that. All you needed to say was that when it comes to reasonable scientific theory, as I've described, trying to attribute this in this space within a historical concept or context is non-functional and therefore does not seem reasonable. There you go. You would have said it. It would have been way cleaner. You would have been able to kind of call Ken Ham unreasonable for presenting that as if it were possible, but not insult the audience. Because you don't want to insult the audience unless you are specifically going for that angle. And if you're going to go for that angle, you've got to be very, very careful about the way you're doing it and how. This comes off as not on purpose. It was flippant. That's just my take. And I'm drinking for it. Because I think that was a really bad thing to have said.
I think it's a really good thing for you to have said, though.
Oh, thanks, Landon.
So I want everybody to consider the implications of this. If we accept Mr. Ham's point of view, that Mr. Ham's point of view, that the Bible is translated into American English serves as a science text, and that he and his followers will interpret that for you. I want you to consider what that means. It means that...
Skip half of what you just said and only say, if you think it's a good idea, what are the implications of relying on a text interpreted as a science or historical document by another person for you? That would be all you needed to say. You don't need to throw in these extra little what you think are digs that are actually just undermining not only your rapport with the audience that's there, but also with, like, anybody. It makes you look bad. This is not a good look. Any other thoughts? Is that just a me thing? Am I wrong here?
No, but I think you're probably talking about knowing your audience.
Yes.
Speak to the audience, and the question, of course, is Bill Nye simply talking to this audience? He's talking to the wider audience. I don't know. He hasn't been. I haven't guessed because he hasn't been consistent. I think what he's trying to address.
Well, there's a consistency. There's an issue with consistency, and there's also an issue with, like, this is also trying to, like, interpret this as I remember 2014 being and what was more functional at the time. This is not great coming off of, like, your Four Horsemen. Right? Like, why is Bill Nye here? You know what I mean? Like, if you're gonna debate whether or not
he's a celebrity.
Well, yeah, he's here because Ken Ham wants him to be there. So he's already playing into Ken Ham's
Do we know
right?
who arranged this? Was this Bill Nye reached out to Ken Ham deny, or other people saying you two should get together? Do you know how this debate came about? Do we know? Just curious.
I don't remember the specifics, actually. I know that I looked into it around the time that it happened, but like we said, that was like almost a decade ago.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up. And on top of that, Smitty also makes a good point. Presumably Ken Ham wouldn't take it as American English. He is Australian.
I don't know that there are specifically Australian translations, other than spelling convention changes.
I'd be really interested to know. So if anybody looks that up, please let me know. And
well, I do know that a lot of English translation names try to be as universal as possible, like the English Standard Version or the New International Version.
Well, I also know that there's, like, if you wanted different I mean, maybe it's because I'm Canadian, but there's, like, it's kind of like functions the same way your keyboard does, where your keyboard has, like, an English version and a French version. So I don't know if that's, like,
well, I mean,
way it
there
works.
are also French translations of the Bible.
Right. So, like, I don't know if Australia has, like, somewhere I just like to imagine that there's somewhere in an Australian Bible that's like, so this cunt Mary down the road. I'm just here for it.
That Mr. Ham's word, or his interpretation of these other words, is somehow to be more respected than what you can observe in nature, what you can find literally in your backyard in Kentucky. It's a troubling and unsettling point of view, and it's one I'd very much like you to address
That would have been a better type of point to have made than all this biblical stuff.
He could have,
right?
Yeah, he could have skipped like 3 or 4 points, brought this one up, brought a little bit more politics back into it if he wanted to, and pick on, like, I would hardline Ken Ham's fallacious, like, lines and borders and boxes that he's drawing, and saying, what the terminology I would use is I would say, Ken Ham, you are drawing an arbitrary line between historical science and observable science, and at no point have you actually demonstrated that that line is valid, nor have you shown that what you're presenting as a two separate individual boxes of science are applicable in any appropriate field. So I would say that not only are you're calling this historical science, but if that were the case, then it should be applicable to mathematics. So if it's not applicable to mathematics, then it's not applicable to physics. And if it's not applicable to physics, then it's not applicable to biology or chemistry or anything else. Because they're all interconnected. And therefore, since they are all interconnected, there is no way for you to actually hard deviate these two sections of science that you're attempting to present. And that's where I would drop that. Hindsight's 20/20 though. And this is something that I do. This is a thing that I'm good at. Yeah! You guys do the science. I do the here are the word things.
Yeah, and the impressions on people things and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
How it's going to be interpreted by the audience, because if you can pick two things, that Ken Ham has said that are pick one strong thing that he said and one weak thing that he said, and attack both those things as hard as you possibly can, you will satisfy the audience and you will get their brain turning, right? Because if I sit there and I present what I just said and I say, here's how these things are interconnected, I presented this and this thing, and nowhere in your rebuttal nor in your presentation were you actually be able to attribute your hard box that you're trying to fit this thing that doesn't fit in your box in, just like the people of the audience do not fit in the boxes that people like to impose upon them, you can kind of loop the audience in. And this is because him distinguishing these 2 points is so quintessential to his, like, whole presentation. If you can just tear that shit down by saying, you haven't presented how this is actually applicable or practical in not only science, but also in, like, not just history, not just, like, general sciences, not biology, not physics, not chemistry, not this. You can bring all of that up. And then pick, like, something that it's relative, like, some strong point that he has, and I don't know. What would be a strong point that Ken Ham even has? I don't know. Instead of wasting your time talking about, right? Yeah, oof. Instead of wasting your time talking about, like, biblical translations, which are not even relevant to the topic at hand, you're gonna have a way, way better, like, impression overall.
I mean, to be fair, I think when Ken Ham was talking about theology and what he believes it means to be a Christian, he was talking in his field that he had more, and that probably is a stronger point. However, that's not what Bill and I is doing. On the other hand, because Bill and I opened up to say, I'm going to discuss theology with you, he's
opened a door.
Yes.
He's definitely opened up a very, very weak link for himself, for Ken Ham to say, well, actually, you're just wrong.
Which he didn't have.
5 races that you mentioned.
Which, yeah, completely irrelevant. Didn't have to do that at all.
It's kind of the same thing. The 5 races were claimed by people who were of European descent, and they said, hey, we're the best, check us out. And that turns out to be, if you've ever traveled anywhere or done anything, not to be that way. People are much more alike than they are different.
I'm just gonna give him a point for not a good way to approach this kind of a topic, because now we're getting into racism, and he's kind of like making a couple of implications, but also you're talking to like Kentucky. This is a know your audience issue.
Know your audience. Yes.
Yeah.
So, are we supposed to take your word for English words translated over the last 30 centuries instead of what we can observe in the universe around us?
Very good. And Mr. Ham, would you like to offer your 5-minute counter rebuttal?
All right, we're going to pause there, and so we can get Ken Ham's counter rebuttal next time, which means we're going to get a 4-parter out of this sucker.
Yeah.
We might. Do you guys want to skip the Q&A, or do we want the Q&A? Because I feel like it'd be really interesting to let them ask the question, let you guys answer the question, and then see what answer they give.
That would certainly be interesting. Yeah.
All right. So we're probably going to end up with, like, part 4, part 5. We might end up with 6 parts, maybe, total. So we'll have to look at that, because we are just over the halfway mark. And to be fair, it did take us a very long time to get through Ken Ham's opening statements, but now that we're past that, I don't think we've been trucking through this ever since.
And to be fair, the pause while I was out sticking myself where the sun don't shine for 1 minute, 11.2 seconds. Not that I'm not counting, because I do count.
How about Ken Ham may or may not be a werewolf?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm very confident that Ken Ham is not a werewolf.
Why?
Very confident about this.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair...
It's just information that I volunteer every once in a while, that I'm quite confident that Ken Ham is not a werewolf. I just like to make sure that I remind everyone of that every once in a while.
You heard
I like
it here.
to think there's a less than 0% chance.
It's
like a T-shirt.
More than 0% chance?
Dapper Dino and a thought bubble saying, I can guarantee that Ken Ham is not a werewolf.
No, I can't guarantee it. I'm just very confident.
Yeah, very confident. Very confident that and
look,
that's a good T-shirt.
It's sort of like when you go to the store and you get like a thing of blueberries and it says gluten-free. And it's like, wait, what?
It's like when you go to the store and you go to the organic section and you're like, this is a grocery store. Everything here should be organic.
Yeah. Was this going to be made of sand otherwise?
I hate sand. It's rough and coarse. It gets everywhere.
I'm just reminding everyone that, as far as I know, there is no compelling evidence that Ken Ham is a werewolf.
Sadly, there is compelling evidence that he's a bag of dicks. But, you can have a lot of fun with a bag of dicks, which is, I think, what we did here today. I think we had a lot of fun with a bag of dicks.
He's an element of a bag of appendages.
He's one of the dicks in the bag, maybe.
There you go.
I like to think that the bag, because there's really 2 things that a bag of dicks can be. It can either be a bag that is full of dicks, or 3 things. Either it's a bag that is full of dicks, or it's a bag made of interwoven dicks, or it's a bag of interwoven dicks filled with dicks.
I mean, I usually assume the first one, but hey, I mean, whatever works for you, I guess.
Hey, listen, I'm a go big or go home kind of person, and also a why not both kind of person. So I definitely fall in the category of, if you tell me a bag of dicks, I am absolutely imagining like a chainmail style bag made of smaller interwoven dicks that has been filled to the brim with dicks.
Go big or go home, yeah.
Go big or go home! And you never know what you can do with a bag of dicks. Shall we get out of here? Is that the end note? That's the end note? Okay. Make sure you check everybody out. The links are down below. Pele has been blowing the fuck up in our faces. And so look forward to the next...
so come... Be sure to come back to the thing, because then you can help laugh at us for those like everyone who failed to predict what Pele is going to do. But on the other hand, you'll learn about monitoring stuff, and we'll have more data, and we'll have good we call it volcano porn, lava porn, lots of lava. We'll get unless Pele decides, okay, now I'm done, and goes back to sleep. You never know. We never know with that. But we do have another show coming up on the 10th, don't we?
Yes, we have another Unnamed Tavern showing up on the 10th. Tomorrow is going to be an art stream for me over on Twitch if you're interested in art stuff. And Friday is going to be Dumbfeck Friday. So join us for any of those if you're interested in the news. Show up for the Unnamed Tavern. Dapper, what do you got going on?
So let's see. Tomorrow at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, I have a premiere. We're going to be taking a look at Roger from Mud Fossil University, where he's going to tell us all about electrons and photons.
Ooh.
For some reason. This is the guy who, by the way, once looked at a cave and said, I'm pretty sure that's a vagina. Or who likes to look at statues and say, those are actually petrified people.
Can we please, is there any, okay, I know there was a guy, hold on, I know there was a guy who was like, look at this mountain range, it was definitely a dragon, or look at this thing, it was definitely okay, so he's actually running around being like, look at this crevasse, it's definitely the vagina of a giant that just died upside down.
Well, so it was a cave, and I believe that, in this case, because of the shape of the cave entrance, he probably would have said died and fell onto the giant's back because of the specific shape of this particular cave entrance.
You know what? I'm here for
yes.
I'm here for that.
He also believes that the stone blocks that make up the Great Pyramids in Egypt are actually ground up in petrified lungs.
All right.
Lungs.
Yeah, like it's got a lot of stuff like that. Lungs. Yeah, like
so
the thing you breathe with. Yeah.
In regards to something that Ken Ham said earlier, and you might have to ask this guy, the Sphinx had a nose at one point. So was it alive, and then now that it doesn't have a nose anymore, it's not alive?
I have not heard him address the Sphinx specifically. He probably has, and I just haven't heard it. I would predict that he would say that the Sphinx was originally a living thing, but that it has turned to stone and been that way for thousands of years.
Okay.
That's my guess.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
so
that's sorry. Did you say this is? Sorry, go ahead, Landon.
Thing turned him into stone. Right? Some.
So
looked at the wrong.
He's not really clear on what. He's not really clear on what the mechanism is for the petrification of these gigantic biological organisms.
Dapper, have you seen Dr. Stone?
Yes. Actually, I watched it with you.
Yes. So it is like this petrification of a bunch of people all of a sudden out of nowhere.
Yeah, apparently. I mean, I guess.
It applies! Oh, no.
So that's Thursday. I actually have two shows on Saturday. So one is here, where we're going to do another Unnamed Tavern. But I'm also going to be doing a show, again, at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. It'll probably not be a crazy long 6-hour show, because, I have to show up here. That'll probably just be a Dapper Reacts, which is my normal Saturday show when nothing else is happening. Then on the 13th, we'll be doing Kent with Bent. On the 14th, it's my birthday. We'll be doing a big birthday thing, and that takes you a week. So there you go.
Yep.
Nice. All right, look forward to the week coming up. Also, keep an eye out here. There are a ton of shorts coming out on this channel soon, and throughout the month. So keep an eye out for those. There's almost one daily up until almost the entire month. So keep an eye out for those. Make sure to check out the links down below for everybody's involvement and what they're up to and what they're into if you want to follow and see what anybody here's up to. Click the like button. Thank you so much for supporting specifically. Thank you so much for the super chats today from Savage Cobra, Michael, King, Inkboy as well, Alicia, Man Cyborg, as well as Vandalia, which I saw earlier. Thank you so much for your support so far, both in this stream and throughout. And we're gonna get on out of here. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.